Hey there, tonight we're diving into the enchanting world of Christmas markets, from medieval town squares to modern-day spectacles, where we'll uncover the surprising reality that these beloved traditions began not with carolers and cocoa, but with cold-weather commerce and roasted meats. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. The clatter of wooden carts and the chatter of bundled-up townsfolk echoed through the cobblestone streets of medieval Europe like the medieval version of a bustling shopping mall on Black Friday. Welcome to the humble beginnings of what we now call Christmas markets, a far cry from today's Instagram-perfect scenes of twinkling lights and artisanal crafts. Back in the day, specifically the 14th century, these gatherings were less about sipping overpriced mulled wine and more about economic survival in the harsh winter months. In the medieval playbook, it wasn't just about celebrating the birth of Christ, although the church certainly played its part by setting the calendar stage. The real MVPs here were the local merchants and farmers who saw an opportunity to turn a bleak season into a bustling marketplace. Picture this, a town square, not yet decked out with fairy lights, but teeming with makeshift stalls. These weren't just any stalls, they were medieval pop-ups, bringing an eclectic mix of goods that could rival any modern-day flea market. Forget gingerbread, the early markets were more likely stocked with hearty staples like salted meats and cheese, items that wouldn't spoil faster than you can say, Merry Christmas. Now, before you think these markets were just a free-for-all street party, let's get one thing straight. The church was watching. With a suspicious eye and perhaps a rosary at hand, the clergy sanctioned these events. Why, you ask? Because like any good PR department, they knew how to spin a narrative. By tying these markets to the Advent season, they not only blessed the enterprise, but ensured it aligned with a holy purpose. It was a win-win. The church got to keep things pious, and the townsfolk got a sanctioned break from the cold, dreary monotony of winter. Let's talk about the goods. Spoiler alert, you wouldn't find any cinnamon candles or custom ornaments here. Early Christmas markets were a smorgasbord of practicality, a survival kit for the winter. You'd find essentials like woolen clothes, leather goods, and tools, alongside regional specialties. In Vienna's December markets, for example, folks stocked up on supplies to last them through the snowy months. It wasn't just about the goods, though. Services were in demand, too. Imagine the medieval equivalent of a pop-up barber shop or a blacksmith offering quick fixes to your household woes. It was like Yelp, but with more shouting and less accuracy. But why all the fuss about these markets? Economics, my dear Watson. The seasonal fairs were a lifeline for local economies. With agriculture at a standstill in the frozen fields, these markets provided a crucial opportunity for trade. It was a time when barter was king, and a good haggling session could mean the difference between a comfortable winter and one spent shivering in a drafty hovel. It was capitalism with a side of frostbite. Romantic, isn't it? Speaking of romance, let's debunk a myth while we're at it. Christmas markets weren't solely about Yuletide cheer. In fact, the seasonal fairs were often tied to pre-existing pagan festivals. Think of it as a rebranding effort on behalf of Christianity. The church cleverly overlaid these with Christian significance, much like slapping a Santa hat on an ancient stone carving and calling it festive. The reality was a bit more gritty than the hallmark version we like to believe. Interestingly, the earliest records of Christmas markets pop up in Germany, with Dresden laying claim to one of the oldest, dating back to 1434. But before you get too misty-eyed about the oldest title, remember that these markets evolved out of necessity, not nostalgia. They were a response to the economic and social needs of the time, a fact that gets glossed over when we start waxing lyrical about tradition. As we dig deeper into the history, one thing becomes clear. These markets were not just a shopping experience, but a social event, a chance for villagers to trade stories, news, and maybe even a little gossip alongside their goods. They served as a meeting point, a place to catch up with neighbors after months of rural isolation. It was medieval networking, sans LinkedIn. So, what's the takeaway from this jingle bell-free version of Christmas markets? They weren't just about Yuletide joy, but were rooted in practicality, community, and a fair amount of ecclesiastical oversight. The church might have lent its blessing, but these markets thrived because they met a real need. They were a testament to human resilience in the face of winter's chill. And while today's markets might be more about the glitz and glamour, their origins remind us that, sometimes, the most festive events come from the most practical of beginnings. And so, from these practical beginnings, Christmas markets embarked on a journey through time that would make even darker. Who envious? As we waltz into the Renaissance, let's talk about how these markets evolved from mere survival fairs into vibrant cultural staples, particularly in cities like Vienna and Nuremberg. Imagine them as the OG influencers of their time, trendsetters in the realms of commerce, culture, and even politics. Vienna and Nuremberg weren't just any cities. They were the Silicon Valley and Wall Street of the Renaissance. Vienna, with its strategic location on the Danube, was a bustling hub of trade. It was the place where merchants from all over Europe gathered like bees to honey, or maybe more accurately, like sharpers to a Black Friday sale. The city's December market, known as the Krippenmarkt, became an institution by the 16th century, offering everything from exotic spices to the latest fashion in card pieces. Talk about a one-stop shop. Meanwhile, Nuremberg, a city that could give Vienna a run for its money, became famous for its own Christmas market, the Christkindlesmarkt. First documented in 1628, it quickly became the go-to place for anything from elaborate toys to delectable treats. We're talking about the kind of treats that would make Willy Wonka look like an amateur. The Nuremberg markets were also known for their Zwetschgenmännler, or prune men, those quirky little figurines made from dried plums and nuts. Why prunes, you ask? Because clearly nothing screams festive like fruit that aids digestion. As these markets flourished, they weren't just about the goods. They became cultural phenomena, offering everything from street performances to the latest gossip, kind of like Shakespeare in the park, but with more mulled wine. They reflected the rise of urbanization, as people flocked to cities, bringing along their diverse cultures and traditions. Urbanization was the snowball that rolled down the hill, gathering momentum and fundamentally reshaping European society. Let's not forget the economic forces at play. With the Renaissance came a boom in trade routes, the arteries of a burgeoning economy. The Hanseatic League, a medieval precursor to the EU, facilitated trade across Europe. Cities along these routes, like Hamburg and Lübeck, saw their markets swell with merchants and goods from distant lands. Silk from the east, spices from India, and furs from the north. These markets were the trading floors of their day, minus the ticker tape and frantic stockbrokers. The rise of these markets was also intertwined with the political and religious shifts of the time. The Protestant Reformation, led by Martin Luther in 1517, shook Europe to its core. The Church, once the unchallenged authority, found itself in a bit of a pickle. In Protestant regions, the markets became a place to assert cultural identity. They adapted, shifting from strictly Advent-related themes to broader, more inclusive celebrations. After all, nothing unites like commerce, right? It was politics with a side of gingerbread. Speaking of gingerbread, let's debunk another myth, the idea that these markets were always about peace and goodwill. In reality, they were hotbeds of competition and rivalry. Cities vied for dominance, each trying to outshine the others with bigger, better markets. It was the medieval version of keeping up with the Joneses, except the Joneses were the entire city of Frankfurt, and they had a penchant for marzipan. Now, let's sprinkle in some economic hardship for good measure. The 17th century wasn't all merriment and mulled wine. The 30 Years' War, 1618-1648, ravaged Europe, leaving towns in ruins and economies in shambles. Yet, like a phoenix from the ashes, the Christmas markets persevered. They adapted, offering a glimmer of hope and normalcy amidst the chaos. These markets were the cockroaches of commerce, resilient, tenacious, and impossible to eradicate. As we look back at this era, it's clear that Christmas markets were more than just a seasonal affair. They were a reflection of society's evolution, adapting to the winds of change with the grace of a ballerina and the tenacity of a bulldog. They mirrored the human spirit, dancing between tradition and innovation, all while keeping an eye on the bottom line. So, what does this chapter in our festive saga tell us? that Christmas markets were not just about celebrating the season, but were deeply intertwined with the social, economic, and political landscapes of their time. They were microcosms of a world in flux, where the only constant was change, and maybe a cup of steaming mulled wine. As we leave the Renaissance behind, our journey through the annals of Christmas markets is far from over. In the next leg, we'll explore how these markets evolved further, branching out across Europe and beyond, becoming a global phenomenon. But for now, let's savor the irony that something as simple as a market could encapsulate the complexities of an era, proving that sometimes history's most enduring lessons come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. As we transition from the Renaissance into the Industrial Revolution, it's time to swap out our velvet cloaks and card pieces for top hats and steam engines. The Christmas markets of yore were about to get a serious upgrade, thanks to the industrialization juggernaut that transformed everything it touched. Imagine if Santa's elves traded in their tiny hammers for assembly lines. Suddenly, quaint charm of handmade toys was competing with the efficiency of mass production. This era wasn't just about puffing chimneys and Dickensian street urchins. It was a period of explosive growth and innovation. The Industrial Revolution, spanning roughly from the late 18th century to the 19th century, was like the internet boom on steroids, but with more soot and fewer cat memes. By 1850, the population of London had ballooned to over 2-3 million, and cities across Europe were similarly bursting at the seams. Urbanization wasn't just a buzzword. It was a seismic shift that saw people flocking to cities in droves like moths to a very smoky flame. So what does all this have to do with Christmas markets? Well, everything. As technology advanced, so did the goods on offer. The quaint stalls of the past, with their locally sourced, handmade wares, were now rubbing shoulders with mass-produced products. Thanks to the wonders of mechanization, you could snag a polished brass clock or a shiny tin toy. These weren't just any toys. Thanks to the magic of steam power, you could get things like wind-up trains that chugged along tracks with a clatter that was music to a Victorian child's ears. The expansion of global trade routes played a starring role too. The British Empire, on which the sun famously never set, was at its zenith and brought exotic goods from every corner of its vast dominions. Spices, tea and silk from India, sugar from the West Indies. The world was a marketplace, and the Christmas market was its local outlet. It's like Whole Foods, but with more empire and less organic certification. And then there was the matter of transportation. Railways crisscrossed the continent like a spider's web, drastically cutting travel times and costs. In 1830, the Liverpool and Manchester Railway opened, the first fully operational railway line in the world. It meant that goods could be shipped faster and cheaper, turning once-rare commodities into everyday items. Pottery from Stoke-on-Trent, glassware from Bohemia, and textiles from Lyon all found their way to the bustling stalls of the Christmas markets. The Victorian era, in particular, put the mass in mass market, a time when consumer culture really found its groove. Speaking of the Victorians, this was their golden era. They practically invented the modern Christmas, turning it into the glitzy affair we know today. Charles Dickens, with his A Christmas Carol, did for Christmas what Shakespeare did for tragic drama. He made it iconic. The Victorians were all about nostalgia, even if it was for a past they mostly made up themselves. And Queen Victoria, with her German prince, Albert, popularized many of the traditions we now associate with Christmas, like the Christmas tree, which was basically the 19th century equivalent of having the coolest Instagram feed. But let's not get too misty-eyed over this so-called golden age. The commercialization of Christmas markets came at a cost. The rise of consumerism brought with it the specter of class disparity. While the well-to-do could indulge in the latest luxury goods, the working class often scraped by on meager wages, many employed in the very factories that churned out the Christmas market goods. It was capitalism with a decidedly Victorian flavor, where the social safety net was more whole than fabric. Nevertheless, the markets thrived. They became spectacles in their own right, complete with festive lights and carolers. It was as if the whole city decided to throw a party, with the market as the central hub. Vendors hawked their wares, from the latest in steam-powered gadgets to the ever-popular gingerbread, now fancied up with intricate designs that could put a Fabergé egg to shame. And let's not forget the influence of advertising. With the advent of lithography, Colorful posters and flyers became the Instagram ads of the day, enticing shoppers with promises of the latest must-have items. In 1870, Harper's Weekly ran a Christmas ad that might as well have said, "Step right up. Get your latest contraptions and curiosities here." It was a carnival of consumerism that would make a modern-day Black Friday sale look like a church bake sale. So, what's the takeaway from this Victorian Christmas bonanza? It's that the commercialization of Christmas markets was a double-edged sword. While it brought about innovation and a wider variety of goods, it also highlighted societal inequalities. The markets became both a place of wonder and a mirror reflecting the triumphs and trials of industrial society. They were a microcosm of an era marked by progress and disparity, where the spirit of Christmas was both celebrated and commodified. As we leave the soot and steam of the Industrial Revolution behind, our journey through the history of Christmas markets is far from over. The next chapter will explore how these markets branched out even further, crossing oceans and cultural divides, becoming a global phenomenon in their own right. But for now, let's marvel at how a simple market could encapsulate the spirit of an age, proving once again that history's most enduring lessons often come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. As the steam of the Industrial Revolution settled like coal dust on a soot-streaked London, the world was already racing headlong into the tumultuous 20th century. The era was defined by 2 world wars, events so cataclysmic they could have easily snuffed out the flickering lights of tradition. But no, Christmas markets, those resilient little bastions of festivity, were about to stage a comeback that would make Lazarus look like an underachiever. The aftermath of World War I left Europe in tatters, with economies as fragile as a gingerbread house in a rainstorm. But if there's one thing humanity is annoyingly good at, it's clinging to tradition like a lifebuoy in a sea of uncertainty. Enter the revival of the Christmas market, a symbol of cultural resilience, nostalgia, and let's face it, economic necessity. By the 1920s, cities like Munich and Strasbourg were dusting off their market stalls, eager to infuse a bit of holiday cheer into a world that desperately needed it. A flicker of hope amidst the rubble. These markets promised more than just tinsel and trinkets. They offered a sense of normalcy and community. Now, let's not sugarcoat it. This revival wasn't just about spreading joy. Economic needs were the driving force behind the comeback. The League of Nations, established in 1919 in the wake of the Great War, sought to stabilize global economies. Germany, in particular, was grappling with hyperinflation. Picture inflation so out of control that the price of a loaf of bread could double overnight. By 1923, it cost 200 billion marks to buy a loaf. In such trying times, Christmas markets were a vital economic engine, offering local artisans and traders a much-needed platform to peddle their wares and keep the wheels of commerce turning. But let's fast forward to the next seismic shift, World War II. The war left an indelible mark on Europe, with cities like Dresden and Nuremberg reduced to smoldering ruins. Yet, as history has shown, if you want to see optimism in its most stubborn form, look no further than a post-war Christmas market. By the late 1940 and into the 1950s, these markets began to re-emerge, phoenix-like, from the ashes of conflict. They served as poignant reminders of cultural continuity, a statement that while the world might have been scarred, the spirit of Christmas remained unbroken. Take the Nuremberg Christkindlesmarkt, for instance. In 1948, just 3 years after the war's end, this iconic market reopened with a modest array of stalls and offerings. Sure, it was more about practicality than pageantry. Think handcrafted wooden toys and simple baked goods rather than opulent displays. But it was a sign of life in a city still reeling from destruction. It was as if the market itself was saying, "We're still here, and we're not going anywhere." This period also witnessed the birth of a new myth, the idea that these Christmas markets were unchanged, beloved relics of an unbroken tradition. It's the kind of romantic narrative that makes for great storytelling, but let's dig a bit deeper. The truth is, the post-war revival of these markets was as much about reinvention as it was about tradition. The markets evolved to reflect the changing times, incorporating new goods and ideas in response to shifting consumer expectations. They became a tapestry woven from both old threads and new, a blend of nostalgia and innovation that would make even the most jaded historian crack a smile. As Europe rebuilt, so did the markets, and by the 1960s, they were thriving once more. But it wasn't just Europe that got in on the action. The late 20th century saw Christmas markets crossing oceans and cultural divides, becoming a global phenomenon. From Tokyo to Toronto, cities around the world embraced the charm of these festive gatherings, each adding its own local flavor to the mix. And just like that, Christmas markets became a global ambassador of holiday spirit, a cultural export that rivaled any blockbuster or pop star. But let's not get too carried away with this picture-perfect narrative. The reality is, even as these markets spread across the globe, they became increasingly commercialized. The quaint, candlelit stalls of yore were replaced by elaborate displays designed to entice and enthrall. It was consumerism in a Santa hat. And while there's nothing wrong with enjoying a bit of holiday shopping, it's worth noting that the commercialization of these markets often came at the expense of their traditional roots. Yet, despite this commercialization, or perhaps because of it, the allure of the Christmas market endures. They remain a testament to our enduring desire for community and connection, a place where the past and present collide in a swirl of tinsel and tradition. As we stand at the cusp of the 21st century, these markets continue to evolve, adapting to the ever-changing landscape of modern society while remaining firmly rooted in their historical origins. So, as we wrap up this chapter of our festive saga, let's pause to appreciate the resilience of the Christmas market. In a world that's constantly changing, they offer a comforting reminder that some traditions are worth preserving, even as they evolve to meet the needs of a new generation. And while the story of the Christmas market is far from over, one thing's for sure. It's a tale that will continue to unfold, one twinkling light at a time. As we stand at the cusp of the 21st century, these markets continue to evolve, adapting to the ever-changing landscape of modern society while remaining firmly rooted in their historical origins. The global spread of Christmas markets has been nothing short of a cultural juggernaut, a phenomenon that would have left our medieval forebears gobsmacked. What began as a pragmatic solution to winter woes has morphed into an international sensation, drawing millions of visitors each year. In 2019, the Strasbourg Christmas market alone attracted over 2 million people, a number that could make even the most seasoned event organizer break into a cold sweat. But let's not kid ourselves. It's not just the holiday spirit that draws these crowds. It's the intoxicating blend of nostalgia and consumerism, a cocktail that's as potent as it is irresistible. Today, Christmas markets are a billion-dollar industry, contributing significantly to local economies. Take Germany, the granddaddy of Christmas markets, where these festive fairs generate an estimated €3 to €5 billion annually. That's a lot of bratwurst and Glühwein, folks. The economic impact is undeniable, transforming sleepy towns into bustling winter wonderlands, albeit temporarily. Yet, as with all things bright and shiny, there's a shadow lurking behind those twinkling lights. The environmental and social challenges these markets face in our globalized society are as daunting as they are complex. For starters, consider the carbon footprint. The sheer volume of visitors, many flying in from distant lands, leaves behind a trail of emissions that would make a coal-fired power plant blush. And then there's the waste. Mountains of disposable cups, plates, and cutlery pile up like the world's least festive snowdrift. It's enough to make even the jolliest elf consider going green. On the flip side, there's the issue of authenticity. As markets spread across the globe, the line between genuine tradition and kitschy imitation becomes blurrier than a hangover on New Year's Day. In their quest for authenticity, markets around the world often import goods from the very regions they seek to emulate. It's a bit like ordering takeout from a restaurant that specializes in home-cooked meals. And yet, who can resist the allure of a handcrafted nutcracker or a delicate glass bauble, even if it's made thousands of miles from where it's sold? But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, or in this case, the gingerbread out with the mulled wine. For many, these markets offer a sense of community and connection that's increasingly rare in our fast-paced, digital world. They provide a space where people can gather, share stories, and yes, indulge in a little retail therapy. It's a reminder that, at their core, these markets are about more than just commerce. They're about celebrating the human spirit and our capacity for resilience, creativity, and joy. So where does this leave us? In a world where tradition and modernity are constantly at odds, Christmas markets stand as a testament to our ability to balance the two. They remind us that while it's easy to get swept up in the glitz and glamour, it's the underlying values, community, connection, and celebration that truly matter. It's a delicate dance, maintaining the charm of yesteryear while embracing the demands of today. But if history has taught us anything, it's that adaptation is key. After all, these markets have survived wars, economic upheavals, and now the challenges of globalization. As we wrap up this festive journey through time, let's remember that the story of Christmas markets is far from over. Like a snow globe, it's a world unto itself, constantly shifting and changing with the times. And while we may never return to the simplicity of their medieval origins, these markets continue to capture our imagination, offering a flicker of light in the darkest of winters. So next time you find yourself strolling through a market, cup of mulled wine in hand, take a moment to appreciate the legacy behind those twinkling lights. Because sometimes the most enduring stories are those that continue to evolve, one festive stall at a time. In the grand tapestry of French history, Louis Roman XIV shines like a sequin-studded disco ball, dazzling, impossible to ignore, and sometimes throwing light where it wasn't entirely necessary. Born in 1638, Louis was the much-anticipated heir to the throne, the gift of God. As his parents, Louis Roman XIII and Anne of Austria, like to remind everyone. But here's the kicker. This divine package came after 23 years of childless marriage. Talk about leaving things to the last minute. From the get-go, life was anything but ordinary for the young Louis. At just 4 years old, he was thrust into the limelight as king, a role most of us wouldn't trust a toddler with. Yet there he was, wearing a crown that probably weighed more than him. Of course, the real power was in the hands of his mother, Anne of Austria, and Cardinal Mazarin, the Italian-born minister who had a knack for political maneuvering and an equally impressive collection of enemies. The court of Louis Roman XIV in his early years was a swirling vortex of intrigue, ambition, and the occasional assassination plot. Amidst this chaos, one would think the young king's life was a never-ending episode of a 17th-century reality TV show. The Fronde Rebellion, for instance, was the noble equivalent of a bar brawl, with aristocrats throwing tantrums about Mazarin's influence and the centralization of power. It wasn't all fun and games, though. This was a serious threat that saw the royal family fleeing Paris in their nightgowns. Imagine that. The future Sun King, in the dead of night, bundled into a carriage like a common fugitive. Louis, however, was a quick learner. His formative years were spent absorbing lessons in governance, albeit through the lens of a child king whose kingdom occasionally needed to be reminded who was boss. Mazarin, for all his cunning and shrewd politics, was a kind of mentor to Louis, teaching him the intricacies of statecraft while keeping the young monarch on a short leash. But as much as this period was about political education, it was also about survival, both literal and figurative. Life at the royal court was an exercise in extravagance. The palace of the Louvre, before Versailles became the talk of the town, was a place where opulence met chaos. Picture this, a setting where the scent of perfumes mingled with the less pleasant aromas of unwashed bodies, a glamorous yet pungent reminder of an era that hadn't quite mastered the art of hygiene. The court was a microcosm of France, with its rigid hierarchy, flamboyant fashion, and enough gossip to fill a tabloid. It was here that young Louis learned the art of spectacle, a skill he would later perfect with the creation of Versailles. Anne of Austria, a woman who knew her own mind, managed the court with a mix of charm and steely resolve, ensuring her son was groomed for greatness. Cardinal Mazarin, meanwhile, played a delicate game of chess, moving pieces on the political board while keeping an eye out for any rebellious pawns. Together, they formed a formidable duo, albeit one that left Louis with a strong sense of distrust that would color his reign. Yet, despite the political machinations and personal ambitions swirling around him, Louis's early years were also marked by a profound sense of isolation. The young king was often a pawn in his own court, a figurehead in a game he was only beginning to understand. This isolation, however, was not without its benefits. It allowed Louis to develop a keen sense of observation, a skill that would serve him well in later years as he navigated the treacherous waters of absolute monarchy. It's worth noting the economic backdrop, too. France, under the regency of Anne and Mazarin, faced financial strains that would make today's economists break into a cold sweat. The costs of war, the need to maintain a lavish court, and the rebellious aristocracy all contributed to an economy that was less boom and more bust. The fiscal pressures of the time were a constant reminder that even divine right monarchs had to balance the books, or at least find someone else to do it. While the young king was growing into his role, the world around him was changing. The 30 Years' War was winding down, leaving a Europe exhausted and ready for a new order. France, under Mazarin's guidance, emerged as a leading power, setting the stage for Louis to step into the spotlight as Europe's foremost monarch. But before that could happen, Louis had to learn to wield power effectively, a task made all the more challenging by the fractious court and an ever-watchful nobility. Louis's education was both formal and informal. Tutors inundated him with lessons on history, politics, and languages, while court life provided a less structured, more chaotic curriculum. He learned that power was as much about perception as reality, that a well-timed smile or a carefully chosen word could sway hearts and minds. This understanding of image and influence would later define his reign and transform France into the cultural and political epicenter of Europe. As the child king grew into adolescence, he began to assert himself more forcefully. Mazarin's death in 1661 marked a turning point, as Louis announced his intention to rule without a chief minister. This audacious move shocked the court, but underscored a lesson he'd learned from his early years. To be truly powerful, you must control your own narrative. The Sun King's era was about to dawn, but not without the lessons and scars of his tumultuous upbringing. In the glittering halls of Versailles, Louis would craft a new image of monarchy, but the foundation was laid in those chaotic early years, amidst rebellion, intrigue, and the relentless march of history. And so, with the crown firmly on his head and the lessons of his chaotic upbringing tucked under his belt, Louis Roman XIV made a bold declaration. He would rule without a chief minister. Let's just say this was the 17th century equivalent of a mic drop. The court gasped, the nobility whispered, and Europe watched with bated breath. To put it mildly, this was not how things were done. Kings were supposed to be guided, advised, and occasionally propped up by seasoned ministers. But Louis, with the confidence of a man who had spent his formative years dodging power-hungry nobles, decided he would be his own advisor. This move was revolutionary, not just because it broke from tradition, but because it signaled a seismic shift in how power was wielded. Louis wasn't content to be a puppet king, dangling on the strings of court factions. He intended to be the puppeteer, orchestrating every move with a deft hand. His strategy: centralization. The Sun King was determined to absorb all the power of the French state into himself, much like the gravitational pull of the actual sun. And what better way to do this than by making the entire government revolve around him? Now, let's talk about the economic context of this power grab. France was a patchwork quilt of feudal privileges, and Louis wanted to turn it into a sleek, centralized tapestry. He started by clipping the wings of the nobility, those pesky aristocrats who had been a thorn in his side since the Fronde. By inviting them to his court, he made them dependent on royal favor for their livelihoods, effectively turning them into glorified courtiers instead of regional power players. In this game of chess, the nobles were no longer the rooks and bishops they fancied themselves to be. They were pawns on a board that Louis controlled. But here's where things get truly opulent. The construction of the Palace of Versailles. Talk about building a monument to yourself. Originally a modest hunting lodge, Louis transformed it into the most extravagant palace Europe had ever seen. And why not? If you're going to be the Sun King, you might as well have a palace that shines. The cost: a jaw-dropping 116 million livres. For context, that would be like spending billions in today's money. While the French economy was less than stellar, Louis had a knack for creative financing or creative taxing, depending on how you look at it. Versailles wasn't just a palace, it was a statement. It screamed, "Look at me, I'm the center of the universe." Louis understood that power wasn't just about ruling, it was about being seen to rule. Versailles became the ultimate stage, where the king was not just a monarch, but the leading man in a never-ending royal drama. Every fountain, every gilded room, every manicured garden was a testament to his absolute authority. It was where the court gathered, not just to govern, but to bask in the reflected glory of the Sun King. The economic realities were harsh, though. The construction of Versailles drained the royal coffers, leaving the kingdom strapped for cash. Taxation was ramped up, with the peasantry and the burgeoning bourgeoisie bearing the brunt of this financial burden. Meanwhile, the nobility, ensconced in their new roles as courtiers, were shielded from the fiscal storm. Louis had effectively turned Versailles into a gilded cage, where the nobility played at power while the real decisions were made elsewhere. This was a masterclass in political theatre. By forcing the nobles to spend their time at court, Louis ensured they were too busy trying to outshine each other to plot against him. It was a brilliant strategy, and one that speaks volumes about human nature. Give people a taste of luxury and prestige, and they'll rarely bite the hand that feeds them. For Louis, the court was both a symbol of his power and a tool to consolidate it. In this tableau vivant of opulence and intrigue, Louis was the undisputed star. He cultivated an image of himself as the embodiment of France, a living symbol of its glory and might. His portraits were everywhere, depicting him in all his regal splendor. The message was clear. Louis was not just the king of France, he was France itself. This was absolute monarchy taken to the nth degree, a system where the state truly was the king. But let's not romanticize it too much. Behind the gilded facade, the realities of monarchy were as unyielding as ever. Louis's reign was marked by constant warfare, with the War of Devolution and the Dutch War draining resources at an alarming rate. The French economy groaned under the weight of military expenses, and while Versailles glittered, much of the country struggled. It's a reminder that even the most dazzling surface can hide cracks beneath. Yet for all the hardships, the allure of Versailles was undeniable. It was a place where art flourished, where music and dance reached new heights. Louis was a patron of the arts, understanding that culture was as much a weapon of statecraft as any army. By turning France into the cultural epicenter of Europe, he reinforced his own image as the Sun King, illuminating the world with his brilliance. As Louis settled into his role as ruler, the machinery of his centralized government began to take shape. He appointed intendants, officials who reported directly to him and oversaw the provinces, bypassing local nobility. This was bureaucracy with a royal twist, a system designed to ensure that all roads led back to Versailles. It was a testament to Louis's understanding of power. To control the nation, you must control its administration. In this era of absolutism, the court was both a spectacle and a crucible, where the future of France was forged amidst the glittering chandeliers and resplendent salons. Louis's audacious decision to rule without a chief minister had set the stage for a new kind of monarchy, one where the king was not just the first among equals, but the sole star in a celestial firmament. As we leave this chapter of Louis's reign, remember that Versailles was more than just an architectural marvel. It was a symbol of a new kind of power, a revolution in governance that would leave an indelible mark on history. The Sun King's audacity had reshaped the French state, setting the stage for a reign marked by glory, conflict, and the relentless pursuit of absolute control. But the story doesn't end here. Louis's journey is far from over, and the challenges and triumphs of his reign will continue to unfold in the opulent corridors of Versailles and beyond. Louis Roman XIV, a king so grand he couldn't just illuminate a room. He had to light up all of Europe. But let's dive into the unglamorous bits that often get glossed over, shall we? As Louis sat on his ornate throne, basking in the glow of Versailles, the rest of Europe was less about admiration and more about, how do we keep this guy from swallowing us whole? Enter the War of Devolution in 1667. Quick history nugget. The war kicked off because Louis claimed his wife, Marie Therese, had a right to some Spanish territories. You see, her dad, Philip Roman IV of Spain, had recently clerked out of the mortal realm, leaving a vacancy sign over the Spanish Netherlands. Louis, never one to pass up a bargain, rolled his armies into the territory under the guise of a family dispute. It's a bit like if your neighbor claimed your backyard because his cousin's great-aunt once had a picnic there. The war was short but sweet for Louis, who garbled up parts of Flanders and Hainault like they were on a royal buffet. But here's the kicker. Louis's appetite for expansion didn't come cheap. This was a time when maintaining a military was like keeping a pet dragon, cool, but financially ruinous. The War of Devolution alone cost Louis around 12 million livres. In today's terms, that's a sum so hefty you'd think twice before buying your morning latte. The French treasury was feeling the burn, and so were the peasants, who were taxed to within an inch of their pitchforks. Despite the cost, Louis wasn't done trying to paint the map of Europe in French blue. In 1672, he aimed his sights at the United Provinces, kicking off the Franco-Dutch War. Now, the Netherlands wasn't just a nation of windmills and tulips, it was a financial powerhouse. Louis, seeing the Dutch as both a commercial rival and a necessary part of his European jigsaw puzzle, decided to take them down a peg. What followed was a 6-year slog that saw France initially steamroll its way through Dutch defences with the kind of speed that would make modern blitzkrieg tacticians nod in approval. But the Dutch, being as stubborn as they are fond of cheese, fought back with a vengeance. They flooded their own lands by breaking dikes, turning their country into a waterlogged fortress. It was an environmental defence mechanism that screamed, "You'll take our land over our soggy, waterlogged bodies." The war dragged on, and the costs mounted. By the end, France had racked up a war debt north of 160 million livres. That's the kind of money that makes you wish you'd stuck to board games instead of real-life risk. Now, all this military grandeur was fabulous for Louis's image as a warrior king, but not so much for the average French citizen. The peasants bore the brunt of these financial escapades. Taxes were hiked, bread prices soared, and the countryside simmered with discontent. If you think the phrase, "let them eat cake," was out of touch, just know that Marie Antoinette wasn't the first royal to be blissfully unaware of the peasant plight. Meanwhile, Louis was busy crafting his image as the Sun King, a monarch whose reign was as radiant as the star he styled himself after. But behind the gilded facade of Versailles, the cracks were showing. The army, though powerful, was expensive to maintain. The constant wars and the need to keep up appearances at court drained the coffers faster than you could say gilded excess. The Sun King's foreign policy was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it established France as a dominant military power. On the other, it scattered seeds of resentment across Europe. The coalition against Louis, an alliance of Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, and the Netherlands, among others, was like a club for nations fed up with France's expansionist shenanigans. This coalition was a testament to the fact that while neighbours might not always be friendly, they sure know how to band together when one of them starts acting like a historical Godzilla. Yet, Louis's ambitions weren't entirely without merit. His wars did lead to some territorial gains and set France up as a leading power in Europe. But at what cost? The French people were paying the price for their king's grandiose dreams, and the national debt was as bloated as Louis's ego. In the grand theatre of Louis's reign, the spotlight often shone on the glittering scenes of Versailles and the battlefield victories. However, the less romantic backstage was littered with financial woes and societal tensions. It's a stark reminder that while history loves a good hero, the reality is often far grimmer. Louis Roman XIV may have been the Sun King, but his reign cast long shadows over France. As we leave this chapter, remember that for every sun that rises, something must fall into shadow. The Sun King's middle years were a potent mix of brilliance and burden, a time when the costs of grandeur began to show their weight. Keep that in mind as we continue to unravel the complex tapestry of Louis's reign. There's more intrigue, ambition, and yes, a bit more financial chaos on the horizon. Stay tuned, because the Sun King's tale is far from over, and the next act promises to be just as riveting. As the sun continued to blaze over the grand palace of Versailles, casting its golden hue on the mirrored halls and opulent gardens, Louis Roman XIV found himself navigating a landscape fraught with challenges both at home and abroad. The latter years of his reign were a sizzling part of political intrigue, economic strain, and social unrest. If the early years were a glittering parade, these were the moments when the parade float wheels began to wobble precariously. Let's kick things off with the War of the Spanish Succession, a conflict that was less about Louis expanding his borders and more about keeping his European neighbors from having a collective heart attack over the prospect of a Franco-Spanish superstate. When Charles Roman II of Spain, the last Habsburg king, died in 1700 without an heir, surprise, surprise, given his family tree was more loop than branch, he bequeathed his empire to Louis's grandson, Philip of Anjou. Now, a Bourbon sitting on the Spanish throne was enough to make Europe's monarchs break out in a cold sweat. Cue the War of the Spanish Succession in 1701, a continental conflict that was essentially Europe's way of saying, "Not so fast, Louis." The Grand Alliance, an impressive lineup of England, the Dutch Republic, the Holy Roman Empire, and a smattering of other nations, geared up to prevent Louis from making Europe his personal chessboard. This was international diplomacy turned into a high-stakes poker game, and Louis was holding some impressive cards, but his opponents were determined to call his bluff. The war itself was a costly affair. We're talking about a budget-busting one, 6 billion livres, a sum that makes the previous military expenditures look like pocket change. To fund this, taxes skyrocketed. The French peasantry, already stretched thinner than a crepe, faced even harsher burdens. This wasn't just a fiscal problem. It was an existential one. The glitter of Versailles was starting to look a tad tarnished to those footing the bill. Speaking of existential crises, let's rewind to 1685, when Louis made the monumentally boneheaded decision to revoke the Edict of Nantes. This edict, originally granted by Henry Roman IV in 1598, had been a cornerstone of religious tolerance in France, allowing Huguenots, French Protestants, a degree of peace and acceptance in a predominantly Catholic country. Louis, in what can only be described as a colossal miscalculation, decided religious uniformity was the way to go and revoked the edict. The aftermath, religious discord that spread through France like wildfire. An estimated 200,000 Huguenots packed their bags and fled, taking their skills, crafts, and entrepreneurial spirit with them. This wasn't just a loss of population. It was a hemorrhage of talent. France's loss was Europe's gain, as nations like England, Prussia, and the Netherlands gleefully welcomed these skilled refugees. It was a brain drain of epic proportions, leaving industries and communities in France reeling. Louis might have been the Sun King, but his policies certainly cast a shadow over his own economy. Meanwhile, back at Versailles, the court continued its dance of decadence. The nobility, still giddy with the splendor of court life, remained mostly insulated from the harsher realities of Louis's policies. They were busy perfecting the art of courtly intrigue, a pastime that involved more backstabbing than a Shakespearean tragedy. To them, the revocation, the wars, and the taxes were mere background noise to the perpetual opera that was Versailles. Yet, beneath the glittering veneer, cracks were forming. The French populace was growing increasingly discontent. The lavish court expenditures, coupled with the exorbitant costs of war, were unsustainable. The national debt ballooned like a soufflé in a heart oven, and the strain was beginning to show. While Louis's image, as the Sun King, was meant to convey stability and grandeur, the reality was more about juggling flaming torches while standing on a tightrope. Louis's later years were marked by a series of personal and political setbacks. The death of his beloved wife, Maria Theresa, in 1683, followed by the loss of several of his children and grandchildren, cast a pall over his court. These personal losses coincided with military setbacks and diplomatic blunders, compounding the challenges Louis faced. His health, too, began to decline, a reminder that even the Sun King was not immune to the passage of time. Despite these challenges, Louis remained a shrewd and determined ruler. His ability to maintain control over his court and his kingdom was a testament to his political acumen, even as his policies sometimes led France down difficult paths. The War of the Spanish Succession dragged on, a grim testament to the complexities of European politics and the high cost of maintaining power. The irony of Louis's reign was not lost on those who observed it. Here was a king who had transformed France into a cultural and political powerhouse, yet whose policies often sowed discord and discontent. The very strategies that had secured his dominance were now contributing to the strains within his realm. It was a delicate balancing act, one that required all of Louis's skill and determination to maintain. As we leave this chapter, remember that Louis Roman XIV reign was a tapestry of contradictions, a time of incredible achievements and profound challenges, of dazzling triumphs and sobering realities. The Sun King's story is far from over, and the next act promises to delve even deeper into the complexities of his reign. Stay tuned, because the final chapter of Louis's epic tale is about to unfold, and it's anything but predictable. As the sun set on Louis Roman XIV reign in 1715, casting long shadows over the grandeur of Versailles, it was clear that the Sun King's legacy was a mixed tapestry of brilliance and burden. The man who had ruled France for 72 years, longer than any other European monarch, was now a part of history. But what did he leave behind? Was it a kingdom basking in the glow of his achievements, or one grappling with the shadows of his decisions? First, let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer audacity of Louis's vision. The transformation of France into a centralized state, a feat akin to herding cats, given the independent-minded French nobility, was no small task. Louis managed to centralize power to a degree previously unimagined, effectively turning himself into the living embodiment of the state. L'état, c'est moi. I am the state was more than just a boast. It was a governing philosophy. The nobility, once power players in their own right, found themselves dancing to Louis's tune, quite literally, at the endless soirees of Versailles. Yet, here's the rub. While the nobility was busy perfecting their courtly bows and witty repartees, the economic backbone of France was buckling under the strain. The cost of maintaining Versailles, the incessant wars, and the elaborate court rituals was astronomical. The national debt ballooned to a staggering 3 billion livres by the end of Louis's reign, and the tax burden fell disproportionately on the peasantry and burgeoning middle class. It's the kind of fiscal mismanagement that would make modern economists break out in hives. Louis's penchant for warfare, driven by a desire to expand French borders and assert dominance over Europe, was a double-edged sword. While his military campaigns initially brought glory and territorial gains, they also drained the treasury and left France with a legacy of enmity. The War of the Spanish Succession, for instance, ended not with a triumphant parade, but with the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, a diplomatic compromise that left France battered and its coffers empty. The peace terms effectively clipped France's wings, curbing its expansionist aspirations and marking the end of Louis's grand ambitions. Culturally, however, Louis's reign was a high watermark. Under his patronage, France became the epicenter of art, fashion, and intellect. The Palace of Versailles was more than just a royal residence. It was a cultural beacon, attracting luminaries from across Europe. The era saw the rise of giants like Molière, Racine, and Lully, whose works defined the French classical style. The French language itself became the lingua franca of diplomacy and culture, a legacy that outlasted the Sun King by centuries. Louis understood that power was not just about military might, but also about cultural influence, a lesson that resonated far beyond his time. Now, let's tackle the myth-busting. The image of Louis as the benevolent monarch, the Sun King who radiated wisdom and grace, is a romanticized version of the truth. The reality was more complex. Louis was a master of image-making, a precursor to the modern-day spin doctor. His portraits, often depicting him in full regal splendor, were carefully crafted to convey an image of divine right and absolute authority. Behind the facade, however, was a man plagued by insecurities and driven by a relentless need to control. His revocation of the Edict of Nantes, for example, was a disastrous attempt to enforce religious uniformity, which backfired spectacularly and sowed seeds of sectarian discord. Louis's court, while dazzling, was also a hotbed of intrigue and excess. The nobles, stripped of their regional power, were reduced to vying for the king's favor, their ambitions confined to the chessboard of court life. This created a simmering resentment that would later explode in the French Revolution. The rigid hierarchy and the culture of sycophancy cultivated at Versailles contributed to a society that was increasingly out of touch with the realities of the broader populace. While the court danced, the countryside groaned under the weight of taxes and economic hardship. As we weigh Louis's legacy, it's crucial to see the balance. A monarch who elevated France to unprecedented cultural and political heights, but whose policies laid the groundwork for future turmoil. The revolution that would engulf France decades later was, in many ways, a reaction to the absolutist model perfected by Louis. His vision of a centralized, all-powerful monarchy left little room for the emerging ideas of Enlightenment thought, which championed reason, individual rights, and political reform. The Sun King's refusal to adapt to these changing tides set the stage for conflict between tradition and modernity. In conclusion, Louis Roman XIV reign was a symphony of contrasts, a masterclass in both the potential and pitfalls of absolute rule. He was a king who understood the power of spectacle and the importance of perception, yet whose policies often belied a disconnect with the practical realities of governance. His legacy is a testament to the complexities of power, how it can illuminate a nation with cultural brilliance while casting deep shadows in the economic and social fabric. Louis's vision was a dazzling one, but it left behind a France that was both inspired and burdened by the weight of his ambitions. As the curtain falls on the Sun King's era, we're left with a poignant reminder that even the brightest of stars can cast the longest shadows. You're standing ankle-deep in mud, squinting against the sun as it bakes the air to a toasty 40 degrees Celsius. Around you, the world's longest river, the Nile, is doing its annual magic trick, turning the arid desert into a lush paradise. Only it's not magic. It's science, ancient Egyptian style, and it's called Akit, the inundation season. Every year, like clockwork, the Nile would swell up and flood its banks, but before you assume, this was some kind of divine gift from gods with too much time on their hands. Let me break it down. This was nature, pure and simple, and the Egyptians were like amateur meteorologists trying to make sense of it. The whole flood cycle started far away in the Ethiopian highlands. Picture it as a high-stakes domino effect. Torrential rains up there sent water rushing down the Blue Nile, which teamed up with the White Nile, and presto, you had a river that could change the fortunes of a kingdom. These waters would rise from June to September, peaking in late summer. But this wasn't a gentle trickle. The Nile could swell dramatically, transforming 34,000 square kilometers of desert into fertile land. That's roughly the size of Switzerland, if you're keeping track. Now, here's where things get interesting. The Egyptians were no slackers when it came to dealing with these floods. They had to be, because the stakes were higher than a pyramid's peak. A good flood meant you could look forward to a bumper crop and a full belly. A poor flood, or worse, a catastrophic one, could spell economic disaster. We're talking famine, social unrest, and the kind of political turmoil that made the pharaohs wish they'd gone into a less stressful line of work, like pyramid building. To get a handle on this unpredictable cycle, the Egyptians developed an impressive understanding of their environment. We're talking about a civilization that, by 3000 BCE, already had a pretty sophisticated grasp of seasonal changes. They tracked the stars, observed weather patterns, and even crafted a calendar based on the flooding cycle. This wasn't just for fun. They had a vested interest in predicting when the Nile would do its thing, because timing was everything. You had to know when to plant and when to harvest, or you could end up with a bunch of soggy, useless grain. And here's a kicker. While we might have weather apps today that can barely predict next week's rain, the Egyptians had the star Sirius to rely on. Its first appearance in the pre-dawn sky, known as the heliacal rising, signaled the impending flood. It was like their version of a push notification, only a lot more reliable and not prone to crashing. But let's not get carried away with romanticizing the past. The reality was that the Nile's generosity wasn't always predictable. While a typical flood brought silt-rich water that rejuvenated the land, the river could also overdo it. Too much water and you'd find yourself with ruined crops and a soggy mess that was about as useful as a chocolate teapot. Too little, and you'd pray the grain reserves would last until the next cycle. And if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that you really don't want to be around when the food runs out. Hungry people aren't known for their patience or rational thinking. The economic importance of the flood was such that it became the backbone of Egyptian civilization. Every aspect of life hinged on this cycle. The Egyptians even had a deity, Hapi, dedicated to the inundation. Think of Hapi as the original hype man, ensuring everyone understood just how crucial the floods were. But let's bust a myth. Hapi wasn't the one steering the waters. No divine intervention here, just a natural cycle that the Egyptians smartly capitalized on. This wasn't just about growing some extra wheat to make beer, although that was a nice perk. The flood ensured that the Nile Delta remained one of the most fertile regions on Earth. It produced enough grain not just to feed the local population, but also to support a complex economy. Grain was currency, sustenance, and a tool of power. The pharaohs knew that a well-fed population was less likely to revolt. After all, it's hard to build pyramids on an empty stomach. So, as you stand there in the mud, watching the river rise, you're witnessing the lifeblood of a civilization. It's a delicate balance. The right amount of floodwater means prosperity, too much or too little, and it's chaos. The Egyptians didn't just survive the inundation, they thrived because of it. Such was the power of the Nile, the world's longest and perhaps most historically significant river. And remember, when it came to dealing with its whims, the ancient Egyptians were nothing short of the original weather forecasters, even if their methods were a bit more celestial than satellite. Now, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of how the Egyptians turned what could have been an annual disaster into an opportunity for engineering brilliance. It wasn't just about letting the Nile do its thing. These guys were practically the original civil engineers. They didn't just sit around with their toes in the water. No, they got busy with some pretty impressive infrastructure projects that would make even modern city planners nod in approval. First up, meet the reservoirs and canals. You see, the Egyptians didn't just let the Nile flood their fields willy-nilly like some ancient water park gone rogue. They built a complex network of canals to direct the floodwaters precisely where they wanted them. This was no small feat. We're talking about thousands of kilometers of earthenworks, dug out with nothing but basic tools and a lot of elbow grease. These canals were the ancient equivalent of a high-stakes irrigation system, ensuring that every drop of precious floodwater was put to good use. And then there were the reservoirs, massive storage tanks that could hold excess water for the dry months. Think of them as the ancient Egyptian version of a rainy day fund, but for water. But hold on, because the Egyptians didn't stop there. They were also keeping an eye on the flood levels like hawks. Enter the Nilometer, an ancient device that was a bit like a ruler for the Nile, but with higher stakes than your average measuring stick. These were stone structures placed along the river, marked with carefully etched lines to measure the water level. Nilometers were the difference between a good harvest and a famine-induced revolt. If the water was too high or too low, it was a warning sign that the coming year might be a tough one. Predicting the flood was a bit like reading tea leaves, but with way more science and a lot less guesswork. Now, let's talk about the people pulling off these engineering marvels. This wasn't a one-man show where Pharaoh just snapped his fingers and poof, a canal appeared. There was a highly structured division of labor to make all this happen. At the top, you had the Pharaoh and his team of royal advisors. These were the guys who decided when and where to build. Then there were the scribes. Think of them as the project managers, keeping tabs on who was doing what and when. They didn't just write down who was slacking off, either. They were responsible for making sure the workforce was fed and housed, which was no small task when you had thousands of laborers to manage. And let's not forget the skilled laborers, the backbone of these operations. These were the folks actually moving the earth, chiseling the stone, and making sure everything was watertight. They might not have had university degrees, but they had something arguably more important: generations of knowledge passed down and honed to a fine point. It was a bit like a family business, but instead of selling carpets, they were crafting the lifelines of a civilization. While we're busting myths, let's clear up the idea that these workers were all slaves, cracking rocks under the whip. In reality, many of these laborers were farmers who took on this work during the inundation season when their fields were underwater. It was a steady gig, and they were compensated with food and other necessities. Sure, it wasn't cushy, but it kept them fed and busy, rather than just wading around for the floodwaters to recede. It's a classic case of making lemonade when life gives you lemons, or in this case, when the Nile gives you a swamp. The social hierarchy that emerged from these engineering feats was both practical and political. The pharaoh's ability to orchestrate such large-scale projects reinforced his status as both a divine ruler and a master planner. It was a smart move. Nothing says, "I've got this," like successfully managing a river that could, quite literally, drown your economy. The pharaohs knew that keeping the Nile in check was as much about politics as it was about agriculture. After all, a well-fed population is a happy population, less likely to rebel and more likely to keep those pyramid projects on schedule. In essence, the Egyptians turned crisis management into an art form. They didn't just survive the floods, they thrived because of them. By harnessing the power of the Nile, they ensured their civilization remained one of the most prosperous in the ancient world. They weren't just building canals and reservoirs, they were building a legacy. So next time you're stuck in traffic because of a little rain, just remember, the ancient Egyptians managed to turn a yearly flood into a well-oiled economic machine. And they did it all without the help of modern technology or weather apps. Now that's impressive. But wait, our journey with the Nile is far from over. Stay tuned as we wade deeper into how these engineering feats were just one part of a larger tapestry of Egyptian life, setting the stage for even greater achievements. And speaking of legacies, let's dive into the heady mix of religion, culture, and a touch of PR genius that turned the Nile from just a river into a bona fide deity. Ever heard of Happy? No, it's not short for Happy, although the ancient Egyptians certainly hoped he was in a good mood. Happy was the god of inundation, the anthropomorphic embodiment of the Nile flood. Picture him as a jolly fellow with a pot-belly and a penchant for blue body paint, symbolizing the life-giving waters he brought each year. The Egyptians didn't just worship Happy, they threw him the kind of parties that would make even the most extravagant modern festivals look like a backyard BBQ. Now, before you roll your eyes and think, oh great, another god to appease, understand this. Happy wasn't just about divine intervention, he was smart social engineering. Worshipping Happy was a way to unify people across the kingdom, giving them a common cause and a shared hope. The Nile's floods were unpredictable, sure, but by attributing them to a god, the Egyptians could personify their fears and hopes. It's a bit like blaming your Wi-Fi for your internet troubles. Somehow, it feels better when there's a face to attach to the chaos. But let's bust a myth while we're here. The Nile wasn't actually under Happy's control. The river's behavior was dictated by the monsoons miles away, not the whims of a deity. Yet, the Egyptians threw grand ceremonies to honor Happy, complete with offerings and prayers, as if buttering up a celestial landlord might help secure a better harvest. They'd craft elaborate statues, set up sacred processions, and even offer up food, beer, and precious goods, all to ensure Happy kept the waters flowing just right. Talk about hedging your bets. These rituals weren't just religious exercises, they were massive social events. Imagine the entire community coming together, setting aside the daily grind to celebrate and supplicate. It was a time for collective optimism, where every prayer was like a vote for prosperity in the coming year. The ceremonies were as much about societal cohesion as they were about divine favor. In a land where too much or too little water could spell doom, you can bet these rituals were taken seriously. But let's not get swept away in the romance of it all. Behind the feasts and festivals lay the gritty reality of living with a river that had its own agenda. Yes, the ceremonies were a sight to behold, but they masked a constant undercurrent of anxiety. Picture yourself as an ancient Egyptian farmer, standing on the banks of the Nile, watching the water levels rise with trepidation. Sure, you just attended a festival that promised Happy's benevolence, but you knew that a bad season could leave your family hungry. And if you're thinking the pharaohs just sat back and let the priests do all the heavy lifting, think again. The rulers of Egypt were deeply invested in these religious practices, both politically and agriculturally. By aligning themselves with Happy, they reinforced their divine right to rule. They were seen as intermediaries between the gods and the people, a role that came with both prestige and pressure. After all, if the floods failed, guess who everyone blamed? The political savvy of the pharaohs in navigating this divine landscape can't be overstated. They knew that keeping the gods happy was crucial for maintaining order. The ceremonies were as much about reinforcing the pharaoh's legitimacy as they were about coaxing a bountiful flood. By orchestrating these religious spectacles, the rulers ensured that their subjects saw them as indispensable, not just as leaders, but as divine conduits. And while we're on the topic of divine intervention, let's talk about another myth, the notion that the Nile's floods were solely a godly gift. In reality, the river's ebbs and flows were a complex interplay of natural forces, not the result of divine whimsy. Yet, the Egyptians' belief in Happy was a clever way to rationalize the unpredictable. It offered comfort in chaos and a semblance of control over the uncontrollable. After all, it's much easier to accept a poor flood when you can chalk it up to divine dissatisfaction rather than mere misfortune. In the end, the deification of the Nile and the ceremonies for Happy were more than just religious pageantry. They were a testament to human resilience and ingenuity. The Egyptians took a natural phenomenon that could have spelled disaster and turned it into an opportunity for unity and hope. They didn't just survive their environment, they thrived in it, using faith and science in equal measure to navigate the whims of the world's longest river. So, as you imagine the grand processions and hear the echoes of ancient prayers, remember that behind the spectacle lay a practical purpose. The Egyptians were masters of adaptation, turning every aspect of their lives into a carefully balanced dance with nature. They understood that, while the gods might be unpredictable, human ingenuity was the real key to thriving amidst uncertainty. Stay tuned, because we're not done unraveling the tapestry of Egyptian life just yet. We've seen how they harnessed the river and revered its god, but there's still more to explore in how these practices shaped their civilization. Next up, we'll dive into the social dynamics and everyday challenges of living in a society where the line between prosperity and peril was as thin as a papyrus reed. Now, speaking of the delicate dance between prosperity and peril, let's talk about the political savvy of those ancient pyramid-building powerhouses, the pharaohs. Ah, the pharaohs, those enigmatic rulers whose very hats screamed, "I mean business." They weren't just sitting around on their thrones, eating grapes and basking in the glory of their monumental tombs. No, these guys, and occasionally gals, were master puppeteers, pulling the strings of social order with the deft touch of a Vegas card shark. You see, the annual inundation wasn't just a natural phenomenon, it was a political goldmine. For the pharaohs, managing the Nile's floods was akin to holding the keys to the kingdom, and not just because it kept the granaries full and the bread ovens hot. The pharaohs leveraged the floods to reinforce their semi-divine status, portraying themselves as the indispensable intermediaries between the gods and the Nile's bounty. In a world where too much or too little water meant the difference between feast and famine, the pharaoh's ability to manage the river's caprices was nothing short of miraculous, or at least that's what they wanted everyone to believe. Enter the world of ancient Egyptian propaganda, where the papyrus scrolls were the tabloids of their day, spinning narratives that would make even the most seasoned political spin doctor nod in approval. Inscriptions on temple walls, like those found at Karnak, were not just artistic endeavors, were the ancient equivalent of a PR campaign. These inscriptions depicted pharaohs offering to the gods and receiving divine favor in return, suggesting that the rulers had a direct line to the celestial powers that controlled the Nile. This wasn't just about religious devotion. It was a strategic move to bolster the pharaoh's image as a god king, a living deity with one foot in the realm of the divine and another in the muddy waters of earthly governance. Let's not kid ourselves, though. The pharaohs weren't actually controlling the floods any more than a modern politician controls the weather. But the perception of control, that was their real power. By aligning themselves with the gods, the pharaohs were able to position themselves as the ultimate problem solvers, the ones who could ensure the land's prosperity through their pious actions and divine connections. And here's where things get interesting. The pharaoh's propaganda machine wasn't just idle boasting. It had tangible effects on their ability to maintain power. A well-fed population was a stable one, and stability was the bedrock of their rule. By convincing the masses that they had a divine mandate to manage the floods, the pharaohs were able to maintain social order and prevent the kind of uprisings that could topple a dynasty faster than you can say Tutankhamun. Now, let's dive into some primary sources to see how this propaganda played out in real life. Take, for example, the Famine Stela, an inscription from the Ptolemaic period that claims to recount events from the time of Pharaoh Djoser, around 2670 BCE. According to the stela, a 7-year famine struck Egypt due to low Nile floods, and it was only through Djoser's intervention and offerings to the god Khnum that the floods were restored, ending the famine. While the historical accuracy of this account is dubious, the message is clear. The pharaoh's divine favor was essential for the land's prosperity. But don't be fooled by the grandeur of these inscriptions. The truth was often murkier than the Nile's floodwaters. Archaeological evidence suggests that the pharaoh's ability to predict and manage the floods was more about careful observation and record-keeping than divine intervention. They used Nilometers to track water levels and had teams of scribes and astronomers working tirelessly to understand the patterns of the river. It was more about science than sorcery, more mathematics than miracles. Yet, the myth of the pharaoh's divine control endured because it served a vital purpose. It provided a narrative that explained the unpredictable and offered hope in times of crisis. It was a story that resonated with the people, one that turned the pharaoh into a figure of reverence and authority. And let's face it, in a world where the line between myth and reality was as thin as an Egyptian reed, the power of belief was as potent as the power of the annual flood itself. So, while the pharaohs may not have been able to command the Nile's waters to rise and fall at their whim, they were masters at commanding the hearts and minds of their people. Their ability to weave a tale of divine intervention and benevolent rule was as crucial to their reign as any military might or architectural achievement. They knew that in the Game of Thrones, perception was often more powerful than reality. And in the end, it was this perception that allowed them to harness the Nile's floods as a tool of both sustenance and sovereignty. Stay tuned, because there's more to unravel about the pharaohs' grip on power and how they used the Nile to their advantage. We've only just begun to scratch the sandstone surface of how these ancient rulers manipulated nature, faith, and human psychology to maintain their iron grip on one of history's most fascinating civilizations. Next, we'll dive deeper into the social dynamics of a society where the pharaoh's word was law and the Nile was both a blessing and a curse. And trust me, you won't want to miss a drop. So, let's take this ancient Egyptian wisdom, wrap it in a time machine, and fast forward to our modern-day struggle with flood management and climate resilience. Just like the pharaohs who, let's face it, had a flair for the dramatic, today's leaders must also juggle the elements and politics with a deft hand. First, let's give a nod to those reservoirs and canals that were the ancient world's answer to a flood insurance policy. Modern engineers have taken a page right out of the pharaoh's book with large-scale water management projects like dams and levees. Take the Hoover Dam, for example, a colossal concrete barrier that provides water and electricity to millions. But while the Egyptians relied on rudimentary tools and maybe a little divine intervention, today's projects come with a price tag that could make even a pharaoh's treasure room look like pocket change. The Hoover Dam alone cost about $49 million at the time of its completion in 1936, which is over $700 million in today's dollars when adjusted for inflation. But not all lessons from ancient Egypt translate directly into modern practices. They didn't have to worry about carbon footprints or rising sea levels, two modern conundrums that make the annual Nile flood look like a leaky faucet. With the climate crisis looming larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza, current flood management strategies have to account for increasingly unpredictable weather patterns. Just as the Egyptians used Nilometers to gauge the flood levels, today we have satellites and supercomputers that track weather changes minute by minute. It's a little less poetic than a stone column etched with hieroglyphs, but a lot more precise. Now, let's talk sustainability, a buzzword that would have made ancient Egyptians nod in approval. They were the original recyclers, turning floodwaters into fertile soil, supporting a booming economy without depleting resources. It's a model of agricultural sustainability that modern societies strive to emulate. The concept of permaculture, for instance, which promotes agricultural ecosystems that are sustainable and self-sufficient, echoes the Egyptians' ability to integrate with their environment rather than just exploiting it. It's a lesson in living within your means, something that might be worth remembering as we plow through our planet's resources like there's no tomorrow. And let's not forget the political ingenuity of the pharaohs, who managed to turn the unpredictable Nile into a symbol of their divine right to rule. Today's leaders could use a bit of that savvy in rallying public support for climate action. After all, managing a natural crisis is as much about perception as it is about science. Just as the pharaohs used the floods to reinforce their status, modern leaders must leverage climate strategies to maintain public confidence and political stability. It's a delicate dance, balancing the need for action with the need for votes, just as precarious as standing on a crumbling facade of an ancient temple. Speaking of temples, let's take a moment to marvel at the sheer audacity of Egyptian architecture. Those massive stone edifices weren't just about religious devotion. They were a testament to human ingenuity and the ability to harness natural forces for monumental achievement. Fast forward to today, and we see a similar drive to create structures that not only withstand nature, but work with it. The floating pavilions in Rotterdam, for example, are designed to rise with sea levels, a modern-day nod to Happy's annual inundation, adapted for a world where water is both a friend and a foe. But let's not kid ourselves. The challenges we face today are of a different magnitude. Climate change isn't just an annual inconvenience. It's a crisis that demands global cooperation and innovation on a scale that even the most grandiose pharaoh could hardly envision. While the Egyptians had the gift of time, with centuries to refine their techniques, today we're racing against the clock. The stakes are higher than ever, with entire cities, economies, and ecosystems hanging in the balance. Yet the legacy of the Nile flood management endures, a reminder of what human ingenuity can achieve when faced with nature's whims. It's a story of adaptation and resilience that resonates through time, offering both inspiration and caution. The Egyptians turned the unpredictable into the ordinary, transforming a potential disaster into the foundation of a civilization. It's a legacy that underscores the power of human creativity and cooperation, a legacy we do well to remember as we navigate our own turbulent waters. So, as you close this chapter in the dusty annals of history, consider the enduring lesson of the Nile, that the greatest resource isn't just water or fertile soil, but the human capacity to adapt and innovate. Whether you're standing ankle-deep in mud or knee-deep in policy papers, the principles remain the same. The Egyptians didn't just survive, they thrived, turning an annual flood into the lifeblood of a civilization. It's an audacious reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, there's always a way forward, if you're willing to dig a canal or two. And as you ponder these ancient lessons in your modern world, perhaps you'll feel a little bit of that old Egyptian magic, not the kind that comes from gods with blue skin and potbellies, but the real magic, the one that happens when human ingenuity meets the power of nature. It's a dance as old as time and as fresh as tomorrow's weather forecast, a testament to our ability to not just endure, but to flourish in the face of adversity. So next time you hear about rising sea levels or flood warnings, remember the Nile and the people who turned its capricious floods into a cornerstone of their civilization. Who knows, maybe with a little bit of that ancient wisdom and a whole lot of modern ingenuity, we'll find a way to thrive amidst our own challenges. After all, if they could turn a flood into a feast, we might just find a way to turn our own deluge into a new dawn. And wouldn't that be a legacy worth leaving? In the sweaty heat of a Grecian summer, where the olive trees stand as silent sentinels, something big was brewing around 776 BCE. No, not another philosophical debate or a symposium row over whether Socrates was just inventing excuses to avoid doing chores. We're talking about the birth of the original Olympic Games, nestled in the lush valley of Olympia. Forget your modern-day marathon madness or synchronized swimming. This was raw, unabashed athleticism with just one event on the roster, a straightforward foot race, the Stadion, spanning a mere 192 meters. That's right, folks, the first Olympians weren't exactly spoiled for choice. Let's take a step further back than the starting line and explore the origins of this legendary event. What inspired these games? Well, it's a mix of myth, legend, and a hint of political genius. According to the mythological grapevine, the games were established by none other than Heracles, Zeus's muscle-bound son, who needed an appropriate outlet for all that divine energy after a busy day of slaying monsters and performing heroic deeds. But myths, as enchanting as they are, often serve as a smokescreen for more down-to-earth realities. The real genius behind the games was the cunning use of these athletic contests as a political instrument. Greece in this era wasn't a unified empire. It was more like a collection of squabbling siblings, each city-state jostling for power, influence, and the best baklava recipe. Enter the Olympic Games, a diplomatic masterstroke that enacted an Olympic truce known as the Ekitcheria. During this truce, warring states would lay down their arms, even if just for a month, to allow safe passage for athletes and spectators to Olympia. It was a temporary peace, like a ceasefire for sports fans, proving that even ancient Greeks knew the value of a good halftime break. This truce wasn't just a symbolic gesture, it was a strategic maneuver. It allowed for a mingling of cultures and ideas, with the added bonus of a break from the relentless bloodshed. Imagine that, taking a timeout from war to watch sweaty men run in circles. The political leaders of the time must have thought, why not? It's cheaper than maintaining an army. The inaugural games, with their single foot race, may seem underwhelming by today's standards, but it was the seed of a sporting tradition that would grow into a multi-event spectacle. Picture it. No elaborate opening ceremonies or pyrotechnics, just pure athletic competition with the winner crowned in a simple olive wreath, a Spartan trophy for a Spartan race. The victor didn't get a gold medal or a lucrative sponsorship deal. Instead, they earned glory, honor, and maybe a couple of goats from their hometown. These early games, however, were much more than just running contests. They were a celebration of physical prowess, religious devotion, and political savvy. Olympia itself was a sanctuary dedicated to Zeus, and the games were as much a religious festival as they were a sporting event. Athletes participated not only to showcase their skills, but also to honor the gods, which was a pretty big deal back then. It's like if the Super Bowl doubled as a Sunday service, with a halftime show featuring Zeus himself. As the games evolved, they became a platform not just for athletic competition, but also for cultural exchange. Athletes, poets, artists, and philosophers gathered from across the Greek world, turning Olympia into a melting pot of ideas and innovations. It was an ancient TED talk with better catering and less PowerPoint. In essence, the ancient Olympics were the ultimate blend of old-school athleticism and savvy statecraft, wrapped up in a package that was part sports tournament, part diplomatic summit, and part religious festival. They were the original peace treaty with a running track. The game's simplicity in the beginning, a single race, belied the complexity of the motives behind them. As a testament to their enduring legacy, the modern Olympics have kept the spirit of friendly competition alive, albeit with a few more sports and a lot more spandex. Stay tuned as we delve into how these humble beginnings would eventually evolve into a grand celebration of sports, politics, and cultural exchange. But for now, let's appreciate this early chapter of the Olympic saga, where a simple foot race lit the torch for centuries of athletic tradition. Just as the early Olympic foot race was the starting pistol for a grand sporting tradition, games themselves soon ran headfirst into an expansion phase that would make even the most hardened event planner break a sweat. As the years rolled on, the menu of Olympic events grew meatier, adding a dash of wrestling, a sprinkle of boxing, and a generous helping of chariot racing. Each new sport brought its own flavor of drama and danger, turning Olympia into the ancient world's ultimate gladiatorial arena. Wrestling, for instance, was no genteel grappling match. This was full-contact, no-holds-barred combat, where the aim was to pin your opponent's shoulders to the ground, and the only things off-limits were biting and eye-gouging. Everything else, fair game. The wrestlers, known as palestai, trained meticulously, often in a state of undress that would scandalize today's gym-goers, but was entirely normal in their time. These athletes oiled up their bodies not just for aesthetics, but to make it harder for opponents to get a grip, a slippery strategy, if you will. Boxing was no less brutal. Forget padded gloves or weight classes. The ancient Greeks took a more minimalist approach. Boxers wrapped their hands in leather strips, leaving knuckles exposed for maximum impact. The bouts had no rounds, and the fight ended only when one man was either knocked out or admitted defeat. It's said that participants often left the arena looking like they'd tried to kiss a porcupine. The intensity of these matches was matched only by the fervor of the spectators, who cheered for blood like it was a particularly thrilling episode of a reality TV show. Then there was chariot racing, the Formula One of ancient Greece. Held in the hippodrome, these races were the epitome of speed and spectacle, a dizzying blur of horses, wheels, and dust. It wasn't just about the thrill of the race. It was a high-stakes affair with significant economic and political implications. Wealthy patrons funded teams, and victory could bring unparalleled prestige and influence. The races often resembled a game of bumper cars on steroids, with crashes and collisions that sent both chariots and drivers tumbling. The risks were enormous, but so were the rewards. Victorious charioteers could become as celebrated as the athletes themselves, with their names etched into history. The expansion of events also meant the games were no longer just a playground for the elite. Athletes from various backgrounds, some with questionable claims to amateur status, competed for glory. Take Milo of Croton, a wrestler whose feats of strength were legendary. Known for his prodigious appetite and even more prodigious biceps, Milo reportedly carried a 4-year-old bull on his shoulders before slaughtering and devouring it in a single day. Whether this tale is fact or fiction, it speaks to the larger-than-life personas that athletes cultivated, part sports stars, part mythic heroes. But let's not forget the darker side of these competitions. The lack of modern safety measures meant that serious injury or even death was a real possibility. The Greeks, however, to embrace this as part of the spectacle. After all, what was a little bloodshed in the pursuit of honor and divine favor? The concept of safe sport was as foreign to them as a smartphone, and the games operated on a different set of priorities entirely. While the romantic notion of amateurism often gets bandied about in discussions of the ancient Olympics, let's be clear. The line between amateur and professional was as blurry as a watercolor painting left out in the idea that athletes competed purely for the love of the sport is a myth as enduring as the tales of Heracles. In reality, winners received more than just olive wreaths. They were showered with prizes, gifts, and lifelong privileges, sometimes including free meals for life. That sounds a lot more like a professional athlete's deal than some noble pursuit of personal excellence. As we peel back the layers of legend and lore, what emerges is a picture of the ancient Olympics as a complex tapestry of sport, politics, and culture. It was a stage where athletes became legends, where city-states vied for glory, and where the boundaries of human endurance were pushed to their limits. As we continue our journey through the history of the Games, we'll see how these early chapters paved the way for a sprawling, intricate saga that has captivated humanity for millennia. But for now, let's revel in the unvarnished spectacle that was ancient Olympic competition, a world where the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat were just part of a day's entertainment. While the ancient Olympics dazzled with athletic prowess and mythical tales, let's not ignore the less glamorous details lurking behind the scenes. The Games were not just a noble pursuit of physical excellence. They were a full-blown economic enterprise, a bustling marketplace of prestige and political maneuvering. Hosting the Olympics was like throwing the biggest block party in ancient Greece, with all the logistical headaches that come with it. The cost of hosting these games would make any ancient Greek treasurer clutch their abacus in despair. Cities that vied for the honor of hosting had to provide infrastructure, security, and accommodations for thousands of spectators, athletes, and dignitaries. Think of it as an ancient Olympic bidding war, minus the PowerPoint presentations and slick marketing videos. The prestige of hosting was immense, but so was the bill. It was a significant investment, akin to a city today shelling out billions for the chance to host the modern Olympics, hoping that prestige and tourism dollars would outweigh the costs. And what about the athletes themselves? Training for the Olympics was not a hobby, it was a full-time commitment. The costs of participating were considerable. Athletes often had patrons, wealthy individuals or city-states, who sponsored their training and travel expenses. These patrons expected a return on their investment, much like modern sponsors. A victorious athlete brought glory not just to themselves, but to their entire city, boosting its reputation across the Greek world. Winning at Olympia was the ancient equivalent of winning the lottery. No gold medals here. Instead, victors received an olive wreath, a symbol of divine favor and prestige. But the real rewards came once they returned home. Cities would shower champions with gifts, cash, livestock, tax exemptions, and sometimes even front-row seats at public events for life. Talk about a sweet deal. In Athens, victors could receive a lifetime pension, a considerable sum that could comfortably support them. It was as if the city rolled out the red carpet, ensuring that their Olympic hero lived like a celebrity. But let's not romanticize this too much. The dark side of this prestige was the immense pressure to win. Failure carried significant social stigma. Athletes who didn't perform as expected faced public shame, and their patrons weren't always forgiving. It was a cutthroat world where only the strongest survived, a Darwinian spectacle of strength, speed, and strategy. The Olympics also played a crucial role in fostering regional pride and solidifying political alliances. City-states used the Games as a platform to showcase their might and cultural superiority. Winning an event was about more than personal glory. It was a statement of dominance. It was a way for cities to flex their muscles without resorting to warfare, a peaceful yet fiercely competitive battleground where honor was the ultimate prize. The Games were also a fertile ground for diplomacy. Political leaders seized the opportunity to forge alliances and negotiate treaties, leveraging the Olympic truce to conduct business and settle disputes. It was like the United Nations General Assembly, but with more sweat and fewer speeches. These interactions helped maintain a fragile peace among the often feuding Greek city-states, demonstrating the game's role as a unifying force in a fragmented world. Cities competed fiercely for prestige, investing heavily in their athletes and infrastructure to ensure a strong showing. The rivalry was intense, with each city hoping to outshine the others and claim bragging rights. This competitive spirit mirrored today's Olympic bidding wars, where cities vie for the honor of hosting the Games, each hoping to bask in the global spotlight. The ancient Olympics were a microcosm of Greek society, reflecting the values and aspirations of the time. They were a testament to human ambition and the eternal desire for recognition and respect. The Games were not just about athletics. They were a stage where politics, economics, and culture intersected, creating a rich tapestry of human endeavor. As we continue our exploration of this remarkable tradition, we'll delve deeper into the societal impacts of the Games and the enduring legacy they left behind. But for now, let's appreciate the complex interplay of ambition, rivalry, and achievement that defined the ancient Olympics, a spectacle where glory was the ultimate prize, and the Games were much more than just a contest of athletic prowess. The ancient Olympics weren't just about strapping athletes, olive wreaths, and a whole lot of sweat. No, they were the ancient Greek equivalent of a blockbuster festival, complete with a side of religious fervor that would make a modern-day Comic Con blush. You see, these Games were held to honor none other than Zeus, the big cheese of the Greek pantheon. Imagine if every Super Bowl halftime show required a sacrifice to appease the gods. Now you're getting closer to the vibe of ancient Olympia. Zeus wasn't just any deity. He was the god of sky and thunder, ruler of all the others, and basically the ancient world's answer to a celebrity CEO. The Games were his party, and everyone who was anyone wanted an invite. It was a religious festival and athletic competition rolled into one, with a splash of political intrigue for good measure. The Greeks were nothing if not efficient with their festivities. The site of Olympia itself was a sanctuary, a neutral ground dedicated to Zeus, where athletes competed not just for personal glory, but to please the gods. It's kind of like if every athlete today had to carry a torch to light the Olympic flame, and then immediately sacrifice a bull to ensure good weather for the Games. The religious significance was no small potatoes. It was the backbone of the entire affair, a reminder that the gods were watching, ready to dish out divine favor or thunderous disapproval. The Greeks believed that by excelling in these Games, athletes were honoring Zeus, and in turn, securing the favor of the gods for their city-states. It was like a cosmic quid pro quo. Bring home the wreath, and maybe Zeus would keep your crops from failing or your armies from being trounced. Winning at Olympia was as much about appeasing the divine as it was about personal achievement. And then there was the festival atmosphere. Olympia was like a buzzing hive of activity, a gathering place for not just athletes, but also artists, poets, and philosophers. It was an intellectual melting pot where ideas were exchanged as freely as the wine flowed. Poets would debut their latest works, philosophers would engage in spirited debates, and artists would unveil new creations, all against the backdrop of the Games. It was like an ancient TED talk, except instead of clickers and slideshows, you had lyres and amphoras. This mingling of minds wasn't just for show. It was a crucial element of Greek identity. The Games were a celebration of Greek culture in all its forms, a showcase of the intellectual and artistic achievements that defined their civilization. It was a time to ponder the great questions of life, like what is virtue, and how does one become a hero, all while cheering on a chariot race or watching a wrestler get body slammed into the dust. Yet, let's not get too misty-eyed about the nobility of these pursuits. The Games were also a hotbed of political maneuvering. City-states sent their best athletes as representatives, and a victory was seen as a testament to their superiority. Winning the Olympics was a statement of power, a way to flex your city-state's muscles without firing a single arrow. It was soft power in a loincloth, a diplomatic coup that could boost a city's reputation and influence. Take the case of Alcibiades, the Athenian statesman and general who entered 7 chariots in a single race in 416 BCE, winning first, second, and fourth place. He did this not because he loved horses, but as a strategic move to bolster Athens' prestige. Alcibiades was as much about playing the political game as he was about winning the race, a true master of using the Olympics as a personal PR campaign. But don't be fooled into thinking it was all about honor and olive wreaths. The games were rife with cheating and bribery, proving that even in ancient times, where there's competition, there's corruption. Athletes would sometimes accept bribes to throw a match or use underhanded tactics to gain an advantage. The Greeks even had a special word for these fines, zanes, which were statues of Zeus funded by penalties for cheating, an ancient version of naming and shaming. In the grand tapestry of Greek culture, the Olympics were a vibrant thread, weaving together athletic excellence, religious devotion, and political cunning. They were a stage where the best and worst of human nature played out, where glory and infamy were separated by the thinnest of margins. As we dive deeper into the history of these legendary games, we'll continue to unravel the complexities of their cultural impact and the legacies they left behind. But for now, let's marvel at how the ancient Greeks managed to create a spectacle that was part divine tribute, part intellectual salon, and part political chess match. It turns out that even in antiquity, the world loved a good show, and the Olympics were the greatest show on earth. The ancient Olympics may have been a spectacle of divine worship and high-stakes competition, but like all epic tales, they had to face their final act. Fast forward to the 4th century CE, and the games were on a slippery slope towards oblivion. It turns out, even the most glorious traditions can't compete with the trifecta of Roman imperial politics, religious revolution, and the relentless march of time. Let's set the scene. The Roman Empire, that colossal juggernaut of power and pizzazz, had its own ideas about sports and entertainment. Forget a simple foot race or a good old wrestling match. The Romans preferred their athletes armed and dangerous, with lions thrown into the mix for good measure. Gladiatorial games and chariot races in the Circus Maximus were the ancient equivalent of binge-worthy TV, complete with plot twists and dramatic finales. The subtle elegance of the Greek games paled in comparison to Rome's blockbuster productions. But the real game-changer was a chap named Constantine, who, in 312 C, decided to embrace Christianity, giving the ancient world a holy plot twist. With Christianity on the rise, the old pagan festivals lost their shine. The Olympic Games, with their roots deep in Zeus's backyard, suddenly seemed like relics of a bygone era, about as fashionable as last year's toga. By 393 C, Emperor Theodosius I had had enough of pagan shenanigans. With a swift decree, he banned all pagan festivals, including the Olympics. This was less about sports, and more about consolidating religious power, a strategic move in the empire's political chess game. Ironically, it was a bit like pulling the plug on the world's longest-running reality show, leaving athletes and fans alike wondering what to do with all that pent-up competitive spirit. So, the games disappeared, vanishing into the history books for over a millennium. But like any good legend, the story of the Olympics refused to stay buried. Fast forward to 1896, and a Frenchman named Pierre de Coubertin was about to play the hero. Inspired by the ancient games, he resurrected the Olympics, not as a nod to Zeus, but as a celebration of human potential and international camaraderie. The modern Olympics were born, a phoenix rising from the ashes of antiquity, ready to dazzle the world once more. Now, the modern games are a far cry from their ancient predecessors. Sure, we've swapped out olive wreaths for gold medals and added a few more sports to the lineup, because what's an Olympics without synchronized swimming and trampoline gymnastics? But beneath the glitz and glamour, the core ideals remain: excellence, friendship, and respect. Or at least, that's the official mantra. Yet let's not kid ourselves. The modern Olympics are a complex beast, a blend of lofty ideals and harsh realities. They're a global stage for athletic prowess, but also a magnet for political posturing and commercial interests. Hosting the Games is a financial gamble, with cities shelling out billions in the hope of tourism and prestige, often ending up with a hangover of debt and underused stadiums. Just ask Athens or Rio. Those Olympic bills can haunt like a Greek tragedy. And then there's the doping scandals, the commercial overload, and the geopolitical dramas that sometimes overshadow the sports themselves. It's a long way from the simplicity of ancient Olympia, where the biggest controversy might have been a bribe to throw a match or an accidentally exposed ankle. The ancient Greeks might not recognize today's Olympics, but they'd certainly recognize the ambition and rivalry that fuel them. In a world that's constantly changing, the Olympics are a rare constant, a testament to the enduring human spirit and our love for competition. They remind us of the power of sport to unite, inspire, and occasionally entertain us with the absurdity of it all. Because really, where else can you watch someone hurl a javelin with the same fervor as an ancient athlete and then catch a snowboarder flipping through the air as if it's the most natural thing in the world? So, as we wrap up this whirlwind tour of Olympic history, let's take a moment to appreciate the legacy of these games. From their humble beginnings in a dusty Greek stadium to the global spectacle they are today, the Olympics have always been more than just a series of events. They're a mirror reflecting human nature in all its glory and folly, a stage where dreams are made, legends are born, and every 4 years, the world comes together to chase the ghost of an ancient ideal. In the end, the ancient Olympics weren't just about athletic prowess or divine favor. They were about the eternal quest for meaning and connection. And as long as there are athletes willing to push the limits and fans eager to cheer them on, the spirit of the games will continue to burn brightly, a beacon of hope in a world that, much like ancient Greece, is often as divided as it is united. So here's to the Olympics, past, present, and future, a testament to the human spirit's relentless pursuit of greatness, one race, one leap, and one moment at a time. As you stroll through the bustling streets of Uruk, circa 3000 BCE, the first thing that hits you is the sheer audacity of it all. This isn't your sleepy village with mud huts and a few goats. This is the beating heart of ancient Sumerian civilization, a place where the mighty ziggurat towers over the landscape like a stone behemoth. To your left, a procession of priests chants in a language that's half song, half incantation. To your right, merchants haggle over the price of barley, their voices rising like a chorus of disgruntled crows. Welcome to the chaos of early urban life, where every day is a balancing act of the divine and the mundane. Now, let's talk about those ziggurats. Imagine a monumental, multi-tiered cake of mud bricks baked to perfection under the relentless Mesopotamian sun. Standing at around 70 feet tall, these weren't just architectural flexes, they were the spiritual epicenters of the city. The Sumerians believed that their gods lived at the top, presumably enjoying the penthouse view of the sprawling city below. But building these colossal structures wasn't exactly a weekend DIY project. It required an army of laborers, countless hours, and the kind of logistics that would make a modern project manager break out in a cold sweat. The real kicker, these ziggurats were financed by a combination of temple offerings, taxes, and wait for it, beer. Yes, you heard that right. Beer was the lifeblood of the Sumerian economy, as essential as the water of the Euphrates itself. It's estimated that workers were paid around 2 liters of the stuff per day, a liquid currency that kept the wheels of society greased and the people happily working, and perhaps a little tipsy. It wasn't just any beer either. It was a thick, hearty brew consumed through straws to avoid the gritty sediment at the bottom. Think of it as a proto-smoothie with a mild buzz. But why was beer so central to their society, you ask? Well, for one, it was safer to drink than water, which was often teeming with delightful little pathogens. A mug of beer was essentially a health drink, bubbling with enough alcohol to kill off any nefarious bacteria. Plus, it was a communal affair. Sharing a jug of beer was akin to sharing a moment of peace, a respite from the daily grind of building civilization from the ground up. Now, let's take a stroll to the marketplace, a vibrant chaos of sights and sounds where the air is thick with the scent of roasted lamb and fresh dates. Here, everyone from the lowliest peasant to the wealthiest merchant rubs shoulders. It's a living, breathing stock exchange where everything from textiles to livestock is bartered. But don't let the hustle and bustle fool you. Every transaction is underpinned by a complex system of weights and measures, meticulously recorded on clay tablets. These early accountants didn't have Excel, but they sure had their clay styluses and the patience to etch out every transaction. And speaking of records, the Sumerians were pioneers in the realm of writing. Cuneiform, their script, was the ancient equivalent of a Swiss army knife, used for everything from writing epic poetry to logging grain sales. It's the reason we know about their bizarre rituals, their guards, and of course, their love of beer. Without these wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay, we'd be left with a whole lot of guesswork and far fewer jokes about ancient beer culture. While we're at it, let's dispel a few myths about this so-called cradle of civilization. Yes, the Sumerians were trailblazers in many ways, but life here wasn't all golden chalices and divine banquets. The harsh truth is that living in Uruk was hard work. Disease was rampant, infant mortality was high, and the life expectancy would make you grateful for modern medicine. The allure of the ziggurate's divine promise might have offered some comfort, but it didn't pay the bills or put food on the table. In short, while we often romanticize ancient societies as utopias of wisdom and culture, they were more like us than we might want to admit, trying to make the best of a tough situation, using whatever tools and rituals they had at their disposal. And sometimes, those rituals were as strange as they were necessary. So as you wander through the dusty streets of Uruk, remember that every chant, every offering, every sip of that earthy beer is part of a grand tapestry, a testament to human ingenuity and the eternal quest for meaning in a world that often refused to make sense. And speaking of strange and necessary rituals, let's wander into the mind-bending world of Sumerian divination. Buckle up, because we're about to take a deep dive into the entrails, literally, of one of the most curious practices of ancient Mesopotamia, liver divination. Yes, you heard that right. The Sumerians had a thing for sheep livers, and not because they were planning a rustic barbecue. This was serious business, where the fate of entire cities could hinge on the wrinkles of a freshly slaughtered sheep's liver. Now, before you dismiss this as just another quaint superstition, let's consider the stakes. Imagine being a Sumerian priest, standing at the center of a bustling temple, surrounded by the echoes of chanting and the scent of incense. Your job is to divine the will of the gods, to predict outcomes that could determine the success of the next harvest or the outcome of a looming battle. No pressure, right? Enter the sheep, an unwitting oracle whose liver is about to become the ancient equivalent of a crystal ball. The process was meticulous. After sacrificing the sheep, let's call him Wooly the Wise for a dash of modern whimsy, the priest would carefully examine the liver, noting its size, shape, and any peculiar marks or irregularities. This wasn't a casual glance over. It was a rigorous inspection, akin to a medieval MRI scan, with every bump and blemish potentially holding cosmic significance. The liver was divided into sections, each representing different deities and aspects of life. A spot here could mean rain next week, while a discoloration there might spell doom for the neighboring city-state. But why, you ask, focus on the liver? Well, in Sumerian belief, the liver was considered the seat of life and, by extension, divine insight. It was where the gods whispered their secrets, and the priests were all ears. This wasn't just mystical mumbo-jumbo. It was a sophisticated system with its own internal logic. The priests were the data analysts of their day, drawing conclusions and making predictions based on what they saw, and let's be honest, probably a bit of gut feeling too. The truly fascinating part, this wasn't just about appeasing the gods or keeping the populace in line with a bit of theatrical flair. Liver divination had very real economic and political implications. Let's say the priests predicted a bountiful harvest. This would lead to decisions about resource allocation, trade agreements, and labor distribution. Conversely, a grim forecast could prompt preparations for famine, such as stockpiling grain or negotiating alliances for food imports. In a society where survival often teetered on the edge of scarcity, these predictions were as critical as any quarterly earnings report is today. But wait, there's more. The political implications were equally significant. A well-timed prophecy could bolster a ruler's legitimacy, suggesting divine favor and justifying decisions that might otherwise be unpopular. Conversely, a negative prediction might be wielded by political opponents to question a leader's competence or to incite rebellion. In this sense, liver divination was as much about power dynamics as it was about spiritual insight. It was a tool, a lever in the ancient game of thrones, wielded with skill and perhaps a touch of cynicism. Of course, not everyone was convinced. Skeptics existed then, just as they do now, rolling their eyes at the thought of leaders making decisions based on sheep innards. Yet the practice endured for centuries, a testament to its perceived effectiveness and the human penchant for seeking patterns and meaning in the chaos of existence. In a world where uncertainty was the only certainty, liver divination offered a semblance of control, a way to navigate the unpredictable tides of fate. So, as you stroll through the dusty streets of Uruk. Spare a thought for those ancient priests, standing at the crossroads of the mystical and the practical, trying to make sense of a world that often refused to reveal its secrets. Whether or not they truly believed in the divine messages they claimed to decipher, they played a crucial role in the economic and political machinery of their time. And isn't that the real magic? The ability to turn a sheep's liver into a roadmap for the future. It's a reminder that in the quest for certainty, humans have always been willing to look in the unlikeliest of places. Speaking of looking in unlikely places, let's turn our attention to the Sumerians' knack for throwing a party. And not just any party, a 10-day festival that makes even the rowdiest modern celebrations look like a quiet night in with a cup of chamomile tea. Welcome to the Akidu Festival, the Sumerian New Year bash where piety and revelry intertwined in a grand spectacle of divine drama and earthly indulgence. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly went down during these 10 days of ritualistic revelry? Well, for starters, the Akidu Festival was all about renewal and reaffirmation, a cosmic reset button, if you will. It marked the triumph of Marduk, the patron god of Babylon, over the forces of chaos. Think of it as a theological blockbuster, with Marduk playing the hero in a celestial drama that would have made Homer proud. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The festival began with a series of elaborate rites held in the Iker, the temple complex that served as ground zero for all things divine. Priests performed purification rituals, chanting incantations that echoed through the ziggurat's stone corridors. The air was thick with incense, a fragrant cloud of sanctity that set the stage for the epic celestial tussle about to unfold. Now, here's where things get interesting. The king, that all-powerful figure who usually sat pretty on his throne, was symbolically stripped of his power. Yep, you heard that right. The king had to endure a ceremonial humbling, a cosmic reminder that even the mightiest ruler was but a servant of the gods. He was slapped by a priest. Yes, literally slapped, and made to swear his allegiance to Marduk, reaffirming the divine order that kept the city from descending into chaos. Talk about a bad day at the office. But let's not forget the logistics of such a grand affair. Pulling off a festival of this magnitude required meticulous planning and resources. You couldn't just wing it with a potluck and hope for the best. Feeding thousands of participants was no small feat. Imagine a feast that included everything from roasted lamb to fresh fish, a cornucopia of culinary delights fit for a king and every one of his subjects. The costs were astronomical, with estimates suggesting that a single Akidu festival could deplete a significant portion of the city's annual grain reserves. It was a gamble, a high-stakes investment in divine favor and social cohesion. The economic implications didn't stop there. The festival was also a marketplace of sorts, a hub of trade and commerce that attracted merchants from far and wide. Picture a bustling bazaar where traders hawked their wares, from textiles to exotic spices, each transaction a testament to the interconnectedness of ancient economies. It was a chance for the city to showcase its wealth and vitality, a reminder of its status as a regional powerhouse. But in true Sumerian fashion, the festival wasn't just about material abundance. It was also a time for social renewal, a chance to mend fences and forge new alliances. The Akidu festival was a political theater where rival factions jostled for influence and prestige, each vying for the king's favor in a delicate dance of diplomacy. It was a reminder that power was as much about perception as it was about brute force. And while the festival was certainly a spectacle to behold, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. The rituals, though grand, were steeped in an undercurrent of fear of chaos, fear of the unknown, fear of the wrath of the gods. The Sumerians believed that the world was perpetually teetering on the brink of disorder, and the Akidu festival was a crucial bulwark against that existential threat. It was a time when the city's very survival was at stake, when the line between the sacred and the profane blurred into a dizzying dance of devotion. So as you wander through the crowded streets of Uruk during the Akidu festival, take a moment to appreciate the sheer audacity of it all. The sights, the sounds, the intoxicating mix of reverence and revelry. It's a testament to the Sumerian spirit, a reminder that even in a world fraught with uncertainty, there was always room for celebration, for community, for a moment of joy in the face of the unknown. But don't get too comfortable. Remember, we're only halfway through this ancient odyssey. The Akiru festival, with all its grandeur and complexity, is just one chapter in the rich tapestry of Sumerian life. There's more to uncover, more to explore, more to question. The past is a vast landscape, filled with stories waiting to be told, secrets waiting to be unearthed. And as we journey deeper into this ancient world, we find that the more things change, the more they stay the same. In the end, the Sumerians were much like us, navigating the challenges of their time with a mix of ingenuity, resilience, and the occasional ritualistic slap. They were masters of adaptation, forging a civilization that laid the groundwork for so much of what we take for granted today. And yet, for all their accomplishments, they were also human, grappling with the same fundamental questions that continue to perplex us. Why are we here? What does it all mean? How do we make sense of a world that often defies understanding? These questions echo through the ages, a reminder that in the grand scheme of things, we're all just trying to find our place in the cosmos. Whether through festivals, rituals, or the simple act of breaking bread with friends, the quest for meaning is as timeless as the stars themselves. And as we continue to explore the strange and wondrous world of the Sumerians, we find that their story is, in many ways, our story, a testament to the enduring spirit of humanity, the eternal dance of order and chaos, the never-ending search for truth in a world full of mysteries. As we step away from the raucous echoes of the Akiru festival, let's take a Sama turn into the world of Sumerian burial customs. Death, to the Sumerians, was not just an end, but a grand finale. Imagine an elaborate ceremony, a send-off fit for royalty, complete with a full retinue of servants, musicians, and even chariots. That's right, in the land of Sumer, the afterlife was serious business, and you didn't head into it alone. The grandiosity of these burials was not just a testament to the deceased's wealth and status, but also a reflection of the Sumerian view of the afterlife. They believed that life continued beyond the grave, and just like you wouldn't want to show up at a party alone, you wouldn't want to arrive in the afterlife without your entourage. The reality, however, was a bit more grim than the romantic legend of kings buried with their entire court. Let's dig into the facts, pun intended. Take the royal cemetery of which dates back to around 2600 BCE. Here, archaeologists discovered tombs that were the ancient equivalent of a blockbuster movie set, complete with all the props. One of the most famous finds was the tomb of Queen Puabi. Her burial chamber was a treasure trove of grave goods, golden jewelry, a magnificent headdress, and intricately carved lyres. And yes, there were attendants, dozens of them. But here's where the legend gets a reality check. These attendants didn't volunteer to tag along for the eternal ride. No, this was more of a one-way ticket situation. The Sumerians had a practice known as retainer sacrifice, where servants and guards were ritually killed to accompany the deceased into the afterlife. It's a chilling reminder of the social hierarchy, where the life of a servant was seen as an acceptable offering to ensure the comfort of their royal master in the great beyond. This wasn't just an extravagant farewell. It was a stark display of power and control. But hold on, before we dismiss the Sumerians as heartless overlords, let's consider the context. In a world where cosmic order was paramount, and the afterlife was a continuation of earthly existence, these sacrifices were seen as necessary. They were believed to maintain the balance between the living and the dead, ensuring that the deceased had everything they needed to uphold their status in the afterlife. It's a reminder that ancient societies, much like our own, operated under complex systems of belief that governed their actions, however brutal they might seem to modern eyes. Now, let's talk economics, because even in death, there was no escaping the numbers game. The cost of a royal burial was staggering, often representing a significant portion of the city-state's wealth. Gold, silver, lapis lazuli. These weren't just trinkets but substantial investments meant to secure favor with the gods and signal the deceased's importance. And in a society where wealth was tied to power, these burials were as much about political theater as they were about religious devotion. The grave goods found in royal tombs also tell us a lot about Sumerian society. They reveal a world where trade was vibrant and far-reaching, with materials sourced from as far afield as Afghanistan, for lapis lazuli, and the Indus Valley, for carnelian. This wasn't just about flaunting wealth. It was about showcasing connections, a reminder that even in the afterlife, who you knew mattered as much as what you had. But let's not get too wrapped up in the glitz and glamour. The vast majority of Sumerians didn't get these opulent send-offs. For the average citizen, burial was a simpler affair, often involving a basic grave dug into the earth with modest offerings like pottery or a few personal items. These burials, while less grand, still carried a profound significance, reflecting the individual's role within their community and their family's hopes for a peaceful afterlife. So, what does all this tell us about the Sumerian view of death? Well, it was as much about reaffirming social structures as it was about spiritual beliefs. The elaborate burials of the elite reinforced their status, both in life and death, while the simpler graves of commoners reflected the more humble realities of daily existence. Yet, in both cases, there was a shared belief in an afterlife, a hope for continuity beyond the mortal coil. Now, let's bust a myth. The notion that every king had a retinue of willing volunteers lining up for the ultimate sacrifice has a certain romantic allure, doesn't it? But the harsh truth is far less poetic. These retainers were likely coerced or chosen from among the deceased's closest servants, individuals who had little say in their fate. It's a stark reminder that the past, for all its wonders, was not always a golden age of sophistication and morality. But before you get too disheartened, remember that the Sumerians, like us, were navigating a world full of uncertainties, trying to make sense of life and death with the tools they had. Their burial practices, while extreme by today's standards, were rooted in a deep-seated belief system that sought to bring order to the chaos of existence. And in that quest for meaning, we're not so different from them after all. As we continue this journey through ancient Sumer, let's carry these insights with us. The past is a mirror, reflecting not just who we were, but who we are and who we might become. With each tomb unearthed and each artifact discovered, we gain a deeper understanding of the human experience, a reminder that the search for meaning is as old as time itself. Stay tuned, because in the next part, we'll dive into the daily grind of Sumerian life, exploring the social dynamics and economic realities that shape this fascinating civilization. From the bustling markets to the quiet corners of domestic life, there's still so much more to uncover in this ancient world. So grab your metaphorical trowel and keep digging. The story of Sumer is far from over. As we continue our archaeological dig through ancient Sumer, the sun setting on our historical excavation, it's time to ponder the grand finale, the enduring legacy of Sumerian rituals. You might be wondering why a civilization that thrived over 4,000 years ago still holds sway over our imaginations and historical narratives. Well, buckle up, because the aftershocks of Sumerian ingenuity ripple through time like a historical game of dominoes, toppling through the ages and landing squarely in modern society. First stop, let's talk about the remarkable influence these rituals had on subsequent civilizations. The Sumerians, with their penchant for bureaucracy and ritual, laid the foundation for organized religious practices that echoed through the corridors of time, from the intricate ceremonies of the ancient Egyptians to the elaborate rites of the Greeks and Romans. Their ziggurats became the architectural ancestors of pyramids and temples, each structure a testament to the human desire to touch the divine. You could say the Sumerians were the original architects of the spiritual skyscraper, reaching for the heavens while keeping their feet firmly planted in the alluvial soil of Mesopotamia. But it wasn't just their architectural feats that left a legacy. Their economic rituals, like the beer-fueled labor system, had a lasting impact too. This early form of wage labor, paid in kind rather than cold hard cash, set a precedent for later systems of economic exchange. The Sumerians were masters of creating an economy of scale long before spreadsheets and financial forecasts became a thing. When you think about it, their ability to turn beer into currency was a stroke of genius. After all, what's more universally understood than the value of a good brew? Speaking of beers and cheers, let's not overlook the Akidu festival. This colossal celebration of renewal and cosmic order didn't just fill bellies and empty grain reserves. It introduced a template for public festivals that combined religious observance with social and political maneuvering. It's a tradition that's lasted to this day. Just swap out the temple rituals for parades, and you've got yourself a modern New Year's Eve. Now, let's debunk a popular myth, the romantic notion of Sumerians as mystical ancients, draped in arcane knowledge and lost wisdom. While it's tempting to view them through the lens of mystique, The reality is that they were remarkably pragmatic. Sure, they dabbled in divination and celestial observations, but these practices were deeply intertwined with political strategy and economic necessity. When a priest peered into a sheep liver, he wasn't just seeking divine wisdom. He was offering guidance in a world where agricultural success could spell the difference between prosperity and famine. And here's a sharp truth for you. The Sumerians didn't disappear into the sands of time because they were outmatched by invading armies or overcome by natural disasters. No, their culture was absorbed, adapted, and repurposed by successive civilizations. The Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians each borrowed heavily from Sumerian traditions, proving that sometimes the greatest legacy is not one of domination, but of influence. The romantic allure of Sumer is in part due to its status as the cradle of civilization, a title that conjures images of a golden age of wisdom. But scratch the surface, and you'll find a society grappling with the same existential questions we face today. How do we balance order and chaos? What is the cost of power and prosperity? The Sumerians, with their rituals and innovations, were not so different from us. They were humans navigating a world as unpredictable as a Mesopotamian flood. So, what can we learn from these ancient pioneers? Perhaps the most enduring lesson is the universality of human experience. Despite the millennia that separate us, there's a kinship in our shared pursuit of meaning, community, and stability. Whether through the construction of towering monuments or the simple act of sharing a drink, the Sumerians remind us that the quest for order in a chaotic world is a timeless endeavor. As we wrap up our journey, let's appreciate the Sumerians for what they were. Not enigmatic sages, but pragmatic innovators. Their rituals, while often bizarre to modern eyes, were grounded in the practicalities of survival. They were a testament to human resilience, a reminder that even in the face of uncertainty, there's always room for creativity and adaptation. So, as you close this chapter of history, remember the Sumerians not as distant figures shrouded in mystery, but as fellow travelers on the road of life. They were just like us, striving for understanding in a world that often refused to make sense. And in that shared struggle, we find the true legacy of Sumer, a testament to the indomitable spirit of humanity, as relevant today as it was over 4 millennia ago. In the bustling heart of Constantinople, where the aroma of exotic spices mingled with the salty sea breeze from the Bosporus, the Byzantine Empire's political machinery whirred like a grand, albeit creaky, clock. This was not your average empire, oh no. The Byzantines had a unique flair for politics, where the emperor wasn't just a ruler, he was the earthly stand-in for God. That's right, they didn't just play the divine right card, they doubled down on it, turning the emperor into a celestial rock star, complete with an entourage of bureaucrats who were more tangled in Byzantine red tape than the yarn of a particularly ambitious knitter. Let's talk about the emperor's role, shall we? Take Justinian I, for instance. Reigning from 527 to 565 CE, Justinian wasn't just any emperor, was the guy who tried to stitch the Roman Empire back together like a determined tailor with a penchant for imperial fashion. He didn't just want to rule, he aimed to restore the glory of Rome under a new Eastern banner. Of course, this came with its own challenges, like the fact that the Western Roman Empire had already crumbled like a poorly baked biscuit by the time he took the throne. Justinian's political strategy was as much about spectacle as it was about strategy. His reign is a masterclass in how to wield power with both a sword and a scepter. He was a man of grand gestures and even grander ambitions. The Hagia Sophia, built under his watch in a mere 5 years, cost an estimated 20 million gold solidi, a small price to pay for a building that would become an architectural marvel and a testament to his divine right to rule. Because nothing says, God's chosen, like a dome that seems to float on air. But it wasn't just buildings that Justinian was good at constructing. He also built an army of bureaucrats, a sprawling network of officials who kept the empire running, often at a snail's pace, but running nonetheless. These guys were the unsung heroes, and sometimes villains, of the Byzantine state, the ones who made sure the emperor's edicts reached the far corners of the empire, from the dusty streets of Antioch to the bustling markets of Alexandria. The Byzantine political landscape was a fascinating blend of ceremony and shrewd diplomacy. Emperors had to be as adept at navigating the religious minefields as they were at pulling the strings of power. The church wasn't just a place of worship. It was a formidable political entity in its own right. The Patriarch of Constantinople wielded influence that could make or break an emperor's reign. So, the emperors did what any savvy politician would do. They co-opted religion to bolster their legitimacy. Forget church and state separation. In Byzantium, they were more like church and state tango. The emperor was seen as God's representative on earth, a notion that was both convenient and terrifying. It meant that political dissent wasn't just treason, it was heresy. This divine association was a double-edged sword, one that emperors used to slice through political opposition and elevate their status above mere mortals. Yet, the Byzantine court was a place where whispers could topple thrones, and alliances were as slippery as the marble floors of the great palace. While Justinian's reign is often romanticized for his legal reforms and architectural achievements, it was also a time of great turmoil. The Nika riots of 532 CE, for example, were a stark reminder of the volatility simmering beneath the empire's glittering facade. The riots started as a chariot race protest. Yes, you heard that right, a sports-related outburst, but quickly escalated into a full-blown rebellion against Justinian's heavy taxation and authoritarian rule. Over 30,000 people perished in the hippodrome, and entire sections of the city were reduced to ashes before the emperor could reassert control. Yet, for all the chaos and bloodshed, Justinian emerged stronger, his position fortified by the very unrest that could have ended his reign. It's a testament to his political acumen, or perhaps his sheer luck, that he managed not only to survive, but to thrive in the aftermath. He used religion to appease the masses, commissioning the construction of churches and promoting Orthodox Christianity as a unifying force in a diverse empire. The Byzantine Empire was a place where politics and religion were intertwined like strands of a complex tapestry. Emperors were expected to be pious, yet pragmatic, visionary, yet grounded in the realities of ruling a vast and diverse realm. They had to navigate a world where divine favor and political power were two sides of the same coin. In this Byzantine game of thrones, the stakes were high, and the players were as cunning as they were ambitious. In the end, the Byzantine political structure was a reflection of its emperor's aspirations and anxieties. It was a world where the divine and the mundane coexisted in a delicate balance, where the emperor's word was law, but the whispers of courtiers and the prayers of priests could shape the destiny of an empire. It's a reminder that history is not just about dates and events, but about the people who lived, schemed, and believed in something greater than themselves, whether that was God, empire, or the fleeting glory of power. While emperors danced the delicate political tango, Constantinople was busy weaving its own intricate tapestry of commerce. Welcome to the Byzantine Empire's economic engine room, humming with the vibrant energy of a city perched at the crossroads of 3 continents. If you thought New York was the city that never sleeps, well, Constantinople was the ancient equivalent, bustling day and night with traders and travelers from Europe, Asia, and Africa. The city's strategic location wasn't just good luck, it was a jackpot of geographic proportions. Now let's talk money, because in the Byzantine Empire, cash wasn't just king, it was the emperor's crown. Enter the solidus, a glittering gold coin that was the Bitcoin of its day, minus the blockchain, and with a lot more bling. Introduced by Constantine I around 312 CE, the solidus weighed in at about 4.5 grams of pure gold. This little golden nugget became the empire's economic backbone, maintaining its value remarkably well over the centuries, unlike the Roman denarius that had depreciated faster than a new car driving off the lot. Thanks to the solidus, the Byzantines could flaunt a stable currency in a world where economic chaos was the norm. Imagine trying to barter your way through life with a pocket full of coins that were worth less than the metal they were made from. Not exactly a winning strategy. The solidus provided stability, and stability attracted merchants like moths to a flame, albeit a very lucrative flame. Constantinople's wealth was legendary, and it wasn't just because of its prime real estate between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. The city was a veritable marketplace of the world, a place where you could buy anything from Chinese silk to Arabian horses. This wasn't just a bazaar, it was the Amazon of antiquity. a one-stop shop for all your exotic needs. Merchants from the Silk Road brought their wares into the city, while the sea routes channeled goods from as far as the Indian Ocean. The city's harbors were a cacophony of ships and sailors, with the Golden Horn serving as the empire's premier docking station. And speaking of silk, let's unravel the threads of one of the most fascinating Byzantine economic tales. The silk trade was to Byzantium what tech startups are to Silicon Valley, a source of immense wealth and even more intrigue. Silk was the ultimate status symbol, a fabric so luxurious that wearing it was practically a declaration of your elite status. This wasn't just about fashion, it was about power. And in the true spirit of Byzantine politics, it was also about espionage. Fed up with paying exorbitant prices to the Persian middlemen, Emperor Justinian I, yes, our ambitious tailor from earlier, decided to cut out the middleman. Legend has it that in the 6th century, he sent monks disguised as humble travelers on a covert mission to China, the source of the coveted silk. These monks returned not with bolts of fabric, but with silkworm eggs hidden in their walking staffs. Talk about a cloak and dagger operation. Thanks to this bit of ancient industrial espionage, Byzantium started its own silk industry, spinning a new thread in its economic narrative. But let's not romanticize this too much. The Byzantine silk industry wasn't just a triumph of ingenuity, it was an imperial monopoly. The government controlled every aspect of production and trade, from the mulberry trees that fed the silkworms to the distribution of the final product. This wasn't free enterprise. It was state-controlled capitalism in its most glittering form. And yet, it worked splendidly for the empire, lining its coffers with gold while keeping the Byzantine elite draped in the finest silks. However, no economic story is complete without discussing the practical realities that supported this wealth. Constantinople wasn't just a city of opulence, it was a fortress of infrastructure. The Theodosian walls, built in the 5th century, were not just a defensive marvel, they were a symbol of the city's enduring stability, stretching over 5 kilometers. These walls protected the city from countless sieges, keeping both the invaders and the fluctuating fortunes of the outside world at bay. Inside those walls, Constantinople was a model of urban planning. Its aqueducts ensured a steady supply of fresh water, while the Mise, the city's grand thoroughfare, was the beating heart of trade and commerce. Along this road, shops and stalls offered everything from spices to slaves, each transaction adding a jingle to the city's overflowing treasury. The city's grain supply, sourced from Egypt, was so well managed that even during times of scarcity, famine was a rarity. Yet, for all its wealth and prosperity, the Byzantine economic engine was not immune to the capricious whims of fate. The plague of Justinian, which swept through the empire in 541-542 CE, was a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities lurking beneath the surface. This wasn't just a health crisis, it was an economic disaster. The plague decimated the population, reducing the workforce and causing a ripple effect across the empire's trade networks. Suddenly, the bustling city seemed a little quieter, the markets a little emptier. The Byzantine economy, like its political structure, was a delicate balance of power and pragmatism, ambition and administration. It was a testament to human ingenuity and the eternal quest for prosperity, a quest that was often as cutthroat as it was creative. In the Byzantine world, wealth wasn't just about coins and commerce. It was about prestige and power and the ability to influence the world stage. As the empire continued to evolve, so too did its economic strategies, adapting to new challenges and opportunities with the kind of resilience that only a city like Constantinople could muster. It was a place where fortunes were made and lost, where the hum of trade was as constant as the ebb and flow of the Bosporus. This was the Byzantine economic engine, a marvel of its time, and a reminder of the complex interplay between geography, politics, and human ambition. Stay tuned, because the Byzantine saga is far from over. There's more to unravel about the empire's relentless quest for power and prosperity, as the story unfolds in the next part of our historical journey. As our Byzantine tale unfolds, we leave behind the clinking coins of Constantinople's markets and dive headlong into the labyrinthine social structure of the empire. The Byzantine society, a place where the elite floated on clouds of silk and incense, while the common folk trudged through the mud of everyday toil. It's a tale as old as time, the haves and have-nots, with a Byzantine twist, Let's start by peeling back the gilded veneer of the Byzantine elite. Imagine living in a world where your social status was as much a part of your identity as your name. If you were among the aristocracy, life was a perpetual banquet. You'd be lounging in your villa, surrounded by luxuries that would make a Kardashian weep with envy. From opulent mosaics that sparkled in the sunlight to extravagant banquets that could put the Roman feasts to shame, the elite knew how to live large. These were the power brokers, the ones with influence seeping from their pores like an expensive perfume. But let's not get too starry-eyed. The Byzantine elite's lifestyle came at a cost, not just in gold solidity, but in the sheer effort required to maintain their status. It was a world of cutthroat politics and constant surveillance, where a wrong word could see you tumble from grace faster than you could say Byzantine intrigue. You see, in the empire, power was as slippery as oil on a marble floor, and the elite had to be as adept at dodging political daggers as they were at hosting lavish soirees. Now, let's switch gears and descend into the world of the average Byzantine citizen, where life wasn't quite as Instagrammable. For the common folk, daily existence was a grind that demanded resilience and resourcefulness. The majority were farmers, toiling under the Mediterranean sun, eking out a living from the land. Yet their labor fed the empire, literally and metaphorically. They were the backbone of Byzantine society, though you'd be hard-pressed to find their names in the history books. City dwellers, on the other hand, wove their own stories in the bustling urban tapestry. Artisans, merchants, and laborers filled the streets of Constantinople, each playing their part in the empire's economic symphony. They lived in modest homes, often cramped and noisy, where privacy was a luxury few could afford. But hey, at least they could count on the excitement of the marketplace, where the air was thick with the smell of spices and the sound of haggling, a reminder that commerce was the great equalizer. Religion was the glue that held this diverse society together, though not always as harmoniously as one might think. The Byzantine Empire was a place where the divine and the mundane danced an intricate waltz. Churches were everywhere, from the awe-inspiring splendor of the Hagia Sophia to the humble local parishes that dotted the landscape. These were not just places of worship, but community anchors, where the faithful gathered to find solace and solidarity. Religious festivals were the social calendar's highlight, offering a respite from the daily grind. Picture this: streets alive with processions, liturgical chants echoing through the air, and a sense of unity, however fleeting, enveloping the city. But let's not romanticize it too much. These events were as much about maintaining social order as they were about spiritual devotion. They were opportunities for the church and state to flex their muscles, reminding everyone that divine favor was just a prayer away, or a donation, if you preferred more tangible guarantees. Yet beneath this veneer of piety lay a complex web of beliefs and practices that defied any notion of a unified religious society. Sure, Christianity was the official faith, but the reality was far more diverse. Heresies bubbled beneath the surface, with different sects vying for followers and influence. The empire was a theological battleground where debates could be as fiery as the chariot races in the hippodrome. Primary sources offer us a glimpse into the lives of ordinary Byzantines, their voices echoing across the centuries. Take the writings of John Chrysostom, a 4th-century bishop known for his fiery sermons. He lambasted the wealthy for their excesses while advocating for the poor, an ancient whistleblower calling out social inequality. His words remind us that the concerns of the everyday citizen were not so different from our own: fairness, justice, and the eternal quest for a better life. And then there's Anna Komnene, a Byzantine princess and historian who chronicled the empire's history with a keen eye for detail and a flair for drama. Her work, the Alexiad, offers a rare glimpse into the Byzantine court's inner workings, where politics and religion were as inseparable as conjoined twins. Her writings reveal the tensions and contradictions that simmered beneath the empire's polished surface, challenging the romantic notion of a harmonious society united under God. In this Byzantine world, religion was both a unifying force and a source of division. It was a tool wielded by the powerful to cement their rule, yet it also provided a sanctuary for the disenfranchised, a duality that speaks to the complexity of human nature. The Byzantine Empire was a place where the sacred and the secular were forever intertwined, each shaping the other in a delicate dance that defined the empire's identity. As we continue to explore this fascinating civilization, we'll delve deeper into the intricate tapestry of Byzantine life. From the splendor of the imperial court to the struggles of the common folk, the story of Byzantium is one of contrasts and contradictions, a reminder that history is as much about the everyday as it is about the extraordinary. So stay tuned, because the Byzantine saga is far from over, and there's much more to uncover in this ancient empire's relentless pursuit of power, faith, and survival. And so, as we sift through the Byzantine chronicles, we stumble upon a chapter that's often overshadowed by tales of emperors and ecclesiastical grandeur, the military juggernaut that was Byzantium. Picture an empire that stretched its sinewy arms across Europe, Asia, and Africa, grappling with foes like a heavyweight boxer in an endless bout. The Byzantine military might wasn't just about brawn. It was a nuanced dance of strategy, innovation, and yes, a fair bit of bureaucratic wrangling. Now, before you get swept away by romantic notions of Byzantine legions gleaming in the Mediterranean sun, let's tackle a persistent myth, the idea that Byzantium was a military pushover, forever on the brink of collapse. Not quite. Sure, the empire had its fair share of military hiccups, but it was anything but a soft target. In fact, the Byzantine army was a well-oiled machine that adapted and innovated its way through centuries of warfare. How else do you think they managed to stick around for over 100 years? Take the theme system, for instance. This was no ordinary military organization. It was a stroke of logistical genius. Devised around the 7th century, the theme system divided the empire into districts, each responsible for providing troops for the imperial army. Imagine a medieval draft system with a twist of local governance. The soldiers, known as stratiotes, were farmers by trade and warriors by necessity, a duality that kept them grounded in the realities of life and death. This system allowed the Byzantines to maintain a standing army without breaking the imperial bank, a crucial factor when constant warfare was the order of the day. Speaking of innovation, let's talk about Greek fire. No, this isn't some ancient cooking technique. It's the Byzantine answer to naval warfare. Greek fire was a fearsome incendiary weapon that turned enemy ships into floating bonfires. Picture a fiery cocktail of naphtha, quicklime, sulfur, and other ingredients so secret that the formula was more guarded than the emperor's wine cellar. Used with devastating effect in naval battles, Greek fire was like the medieval equivalent of a guided missile, unpredictable, terrifying, and utterly effective. It was a game-changer, a fiery testament to Byzantine ingenuity that kept would-be invaders at bay and ensured the empire's survival. But let's not overlook the Byzantine knack for diplomacy, a skill that was as important as any weapon in their arsenal. If war is politics by other means, then diplomacy was Byzantium's way of turning enemies into frenemies. The Byzantines were masters of the art of alliance, often playing one enemy off against another. They knew the value of a well-placed bribe or a strategically arranged marriage, viewing treaties as flexible instruments rather than ironclad commitments. A Byzantine emperor was as likely to charm his way out of trouble as he was to fight his way out, proof that sometimes the pen, or the honeyed tongue, is mightier than the sword. One can't discuss Byzantine military prowess without tipping a hat to some of its standout leaders. Enter Basil Roman II, also known as the Bulgar Slayer. Reigning from 976 to 1025 CE, Basil was the kind of emperor who led from the front lines. His campaign against the Bulgarians culminated in the Battle of Claudion in 1014, where he decisively defeated his foes, allegedly blinding 99 out of every 100 prisoners, leaving one-sided to lead the rest home. A brutal, albeit effective, message that echoed across the medieval world. Basil's reign marked a period of military resurgence, expanding the empire's borders and solidifying its power in the Balkans. And then there's the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, a turning point often miscast as the beginning of the end for Byzantium. While it's true that the defeat at the hands of the Seljuk Turks was a significant blow, the empire didn't crumble overnight. Instead, it adapted, albeit with some stumbles along the way. The aftermath of Manzikert saw a reorganization of military forces and a renewed emphasis on diplomacy, proving that the Byzantines could pivot and evolve in the face of adversity. The Byzantine military machine was a paradox of efficiency and complexity, a tapestry woven with threads of innovation, strategy, and political acumen. It was a force that defied simple categorization, much like the empire itself. So, the next time someone waxes lyrical about Byzantine decline, remind them of the empire's remarkable ability to endure and adapt, a testament to its resilience in a world where survival was never guaranteed. But don't worry, our Byzantine saga isn't over yet. We've only just begun to scratch the surface of this enigmatic empire's martial prowess and bureaucratic brilliance. Next, we'll delve deeper into the Byzantine bureaucracy, a labyrinthine system as fascinating as it was Byzantine in every sense of the word. So stay tuned, because the story of Byzantium is far from finished, and there are still plenty of secrets waiting to be uncovered in the annals of history. What do you get when you mix a complex bureaucracy with a relentless quest for knowledge and an artistic flair that could rival the Renaissance? You get the Byzantine Empire, a civilization that didn't just survive the sands of time, but left behind a legacy as rich and textured as a Byzantine mosaic. Let's dive into the cultural and intellectual currents that, like the Bosporus, flowed through this empire and beyond, shaping the world in ways that still echo today. The Byzantine Empire was the ultimate pack-rat of antiquity, hoarding classical knowledge like a dragon guards its treasure. Picture a civilization that took the crumbling scrolls of ancient Greece, dusted them off, and said, "These old things, they're just getting started." As the Western Roman Empire crumbled into a historical footnote, Byzantium was busy preserving the works of Plato, Aristotle, and a who's who of ancient thinkers. Libraries like those in Constantinople and Alexandria were the intellectual fortresses where this knowledge hunkered down, waiting for its Renaissance encore. But let's not pretend this was just an act of benevolence. The Byzantines were as much about intellectual one-upmanship as they were about holy scriptures. Sure, they saved the classics, but they also infused them with their own twists, merging ancient philosophy with Christian theology in a way that would make even the most flexible yoga instructor proud. This synthesis laid the groundwork for Byzantine philosophy, a heady mix of metaphysics and theology, with thinkers like John of Damascus leading the charge. His fount of knowledge wasn't just a philosophical treatise, it was a veritable roadmap for medieval scholastics who would later light up the European intellectual scene. And speaking of lighting things up, let's talk art, specifically those jaw-dropping mosaics and icon paintings that would make any art historian swoon. The Byzantine aesthetic was all about the divine bling, with gold leaf and vibrant colors used to depict holy figures in a style that was both otherworldly and accessible. The Hagia Sophia, with its shimmering dome and ethereal mosaics, was a celestial billboard proclaiming both religious devotion and imperial might. But behind the glitter, there was a stern face of religious orthodoxy, keeping everything in check. Icons weren't just pretty pictures. They were windows into the divine, a concept that sparked the iconoclast controversy. From 726 to 843 CE, the empire was embroiled in a theological tug-of-war over whether these images were holy or heretical. It was a debate that split the empire and left it with a few more religious scars. While the Byzantine Empire was busy arguing over icons, it also managed to churn out some literary gems. Enter Anna Karenine, our favorite Byzantine princess with a pen. Her Alexiad wasn't just a chronicle, it was a behind-the-scenes tour of imperial politics, complete with intrigue, betrayal, and the occasional battle. Then there was Procopius, whose secret history offered a scathing behind-the-curtain peek at Emperor Justinian's court, proving that even in Byzantium, gossip was a timeless art form. Yet, for all its cultural achievements, the Byzantine Empire was an enigma wrapped in silk, with its cultural output both a product of and a rebellion against its political and religious constraints. It was a place where the church and the state were locked in a delicate dance, each leading and following in turns. The tension between innovation and orthodoxy, creativity and control, was the crucible that forged the empire's cultural legacy. This duality was mirrored in its architecture, too. The Theodosian walls weren't just about keeping invaders out. They were a testament to the empire's enduring strength and ingenuity, a physical manifestation of its ability to withstand the test of time. But let's not get too misty-eyed. The Byzantine influence wasn't all sunshine and frescoes. The empire's cultural and intellectual legacy was a double-edged sword, its preservation of knowledge both a gift and a burden. While it laid the groundwork for the Renaissance, it also cast a long shadow reminding Europe of what it had lost during the so-called Dark Ages. As scholars fled the crumbling Byzantine Empire in the 15th century, they carried with them not just books and manuscripts, but a spark that would ignite a cultural rebirth in Western Europe. Suddenly, Italy was awash with ancient texts, and scholars were scrambling to decipher the mysteries of the ancients, turning the intellectual tide and setting the stage for a new era of discovery. Yet the Byzantine legacy wasn't just a Western affair. The empire's influence stretched east as well, shaping the cultural and religious landscape of Eastern Europe and the Slavic world. The Cyrillic alphabet, anyone. You have Byzantium to thank for that, courtesy of Saints Cyril and Methodius, who brought literacy and Orthodox Christianity to the Slavic peoples. This cultural diffusion was as much a strategic maneuver as it was a missionary endeavor, a reminder that in Byzantium, politics and faith were always two sides of the same gold-plated coin. In the end, the Byzantine Empire was a paradox, a civilization that managed to be both a guardian of the past and a catalyst for the future. It was an empire that danced on the edge of chaos, its cultural achievements a testament to human resilience and creativity. As we wrap up our Byzantine journey, let's remember that history is a tapestry of contradictions, woven with threads of triumph and tragedy, innovation and tradition. The Byzantine Empire may have faded into the annals of history, but its legacy continues to resonate, a reminder that the past is never truly past, but a constant dialogue with the present. And if there's one thing the Byzantines taught us, it's that the dance between the old and the new is what keeps history alive, vibrant, and ever so intriguing. In the vast, swirling sands of Central Asia, where the wind whispers secrets of ages past, a group of nomadic tribes, who probably didn't see themselves as the next big thing, were setting the stage for an empire that would shake the foundations of the medieval world. Enter the Arghaz Turks, a merry band of wanderers who, like a medieval rock band touring the steppes, were about to crank up the volume on history. Let's get one thing straight. The Arghaz Turks weren't exactly the poster children for empire building at first glance. They were more akin to a traveling circus, minus the elephants, but with a lot more horses. These guys were masters of the saddle, living life on horseback, which was a pretty sweet gig when you consider the alternative was a lot of sand in your boots. But life on the move wasn't just a lifestyle choice. It was survival. We're talking about the 10th and 11th centuries here, a time when the Middle East was less of a peaceful oasis and more of a geopolitical marsh pit. In this chaotic backdrop, a certain Tughril Beg emerged from the Arghaz ranks. Now, Tughril wasn't just any guy with a cool name. He was the mastermind who took these nomads from zero to hero in the medieval power game. Think of him as the Steve Jobs of the steppes, minus the turtleneck, but with a vision that stretched beyond the horizon. Tughril knew that the key to power wasn't just in numbers or horses. It was in alliances and a keen understanding of when to strike. The story of Tughril Beg is a classic underdog tale, but with a twist. Forget about the lone hero battling against all odds. Tughril was more of a chess master, moving pieces on the board with precision. He didn't just stumble into power. He orchestrated it. By 1037, he had rallied the Arghaz tribes under his banner, and they were on the move, eyeing the rich lands of Persia. Tughril wasn't just content with raiding and pillaging, though that was certainly on the itinerary. He wanted legitimacy, and what better way to get it than by walking into the chaotic mess that was the Abbasid Caliphate and offering a helping hand. Ah, the Abbasid Caliphate, the once mighty powerhouse, that was now more of a shadow of its former self, like a washed-up rock star clinging to past glories. By the mid-11th century, they were in desperate need of someone to clear the stage of rival factions, and Tughril was more than happy to oblige. In 1055, he marched into Baghdad not as a conqueror, but as a savior. The Caliph, probably realizing this was a if you can't beat them, join them situation, acknowledged Tughril as the Sultan, a title that was more than just a fancy hat, though who doesn't love a good hat? With this move, Tughril established the Seljuk Empire, a sprawling realm that stretched from the Hindu Kush to eastern Anatolia. It wasn't just the size of the empire that mattered, it was its strategic importance. The Seljuks controlled key trade routes, making them the medieval equivalent of a tall booth operator with a very long reach. But let's not romanticize this too much. The rise of the Seljuk Empire was as much about diplomacy and smart alliances as it was about brute force. Tughrel's success was built on a foundation of careful planning and understanding the geopolitical chessboard. Now, if you're thinking this sounds like an episode of medieval Game of Thrones, you're not far off. The Middle East in the 11th century was a hotbed of intrigue, betrayal, and shifting alliances. Tughrel Beg was a master of playing the long game, knowing when to strike and when to hold back, much like a poker player with a killer hand. His leadership style wasn't about ruling with an iron fist, but about balancing power and keeping the various factions in check. But let's not get too carried away with the hero worship. The Seljuk Empire, like any good story, had its fair share of less than glamorous moments. The romantic notion of a noble and just empire builder quickly fades when you consider the realities of medieval warfare and politics. Tughrel's rise to power was marked by battles and sieges, with cities like Nishapur and Isfahan experiencing the full might of Seljuk ambition. It's also worth noting that Tughrel's success wasn't just about his own genius. He was surrounded by a cadre of capable commanders and advisors who helped steer the Seljuk ship. The likes of his brother, Chagri Beg, played pivotal roles in securing and expanding the empire. Tughrel's ability to delegate and trust in his inner circle was a key factor in his success, proving that even the greatest leaders need a solid team. In the end, Tughrel Beg's story is one of transformation, turning a nomadic tribe into a formidable empire that would leave a lasting mark on history. The Seljuk Empire wasn't built in a day, nor was it sustained by sheer luck. It was the result of calculated moves, strategic alliances, and a deep understanding of the political landscape. Tughrel Beg might not have had dragons, but he sure knew how to breathe fire into a fledgling empire. As the Seljuk Empire began to take shape, it was clear that Tughrel's vision extended beyond mere conquest. He sought to create a legacy, a new order in a world that was as turbulent as the desert winds. And while the sands of time have long since covered the footprints of the Arghaz Turks, their story remains a testament to the power of ambition and the art of empire building in a world where chaos and opportunity danced hand in hand. And so, as Tughrel Beg's empire-building saga laid the groundwork, enter Alp Arslan, Tughrel's nephew and the ultimate embodiment of the phrase, "Hold my kebab and watch this." If Tughrel was the chess master, Alp Arslan was the daring knight who charged across the board, lancing through opposition with an audacity that would make even the boldest medieval warrior blush. This guy didn't just expand the empire, he practically blew it up like a balloon at a kid's birthday party, except with more swords and fewer clowns. Now, Alp Arslan, whose name fittingly means heroic lion in Turkish, wasn't about to settle for the status quo. When he took the throne in 1063, he had one thing in mind: expansion. And not just any expansion, but the kind that earns you a place in the annals of history, preferably not as a cautionary tale. With the Seljuks already holding a firm grip on Persia, Arslan had his sights set on the Byzantine Empire, the medieval equivalent of a heavyweight champion with a glass jaw. Here's a fun fact. By the time Arslan was ready to make his move, the Byzantine Empire was a sprawling but creaky machine. Picture an old sports car, still impressive, but prone to stalling at the most inconvenient times. Their empire stretched from Italy to the Middle East, but their power was spread thinner than the last spoonful of yogurt in the fridge. Enter the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, a clash that wasn't just a battle, but a seismic shift in medieval geopolitics. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty. Manzikert wasn't just a random battlefield on some dusty map. Its location in eastern Anatolia was strategic, a crucial crossroads that connected east to west and north to south. Whoever controlled Manzikert held the keys to Anatolia, and Arslan wasn't about to let that opportunity slip through his fingers. The Byzantine Emperor, Romanos Roman IV Diogenes, meanwhile, decided a grand military campaign was just what the doctor ordered to show the Seljuks who was boss. Spoiler alert, it wasn't him. Picture this. On August 26, 1071, the Byzantine forces, potentially over 30,000 strong, lined up opposite Arslan's comparatively lean army of around 20,000. But don't let the numbers fool you. This wasn't a simple case of bigger is better. Arslan had something far more valuable: superior tactics and a cool head. Romanos, on the other hand, had more backstabbers in his ranks than a bad medieval sitcom. His generals were less interested in victory and more concerned with their own agendas, which, as you can imagine, isn't the best recipe for battlefield success. Now, here's the kicker. Arslan didn't just win. He pulled off one of the most humiliating defeats in Byzantine history through strategic maneuvers and feigned retreats, essentially playing dead until the Byzantines took the bait. Arslan's forces encircled and crushed the Byzantine army. Romanos himself was captured, setting off a chain reaction back in Constantinople that would leave the empire in disarray. This wasn't just a victory, it was a mic drop moment in medieval warfare. But let's not get too swept up in the romanticized vision of the heroic sultan triumphing against the odds. The reality was gritty and brutal, a complex tapestry of political machinations and opportunistic gambles. Manzikert didn't just happen in a vacuum. It was the result of Arslan's skillful navigation of alliances and his ability to exploit the Byzantine Empire's internal disunity. Think of it as a medieval power play, where Arslan wasn't just a warrior but a shrewd statesman. Economically, the victory at Manzikert opened the floodgates to Anatolia, a region ripe with resources and strategic value. For the Seljuks, this was like hitting the jackpot in a high-stakes poker game. The influx of wealth and territory bolstered the empire, transforming it into a dominant force that would shape the Middle Eastern landscape for centuries. The Byzantine Empire, meanwhile, was left reeling, scrambling to patch up the gaping holes in its defenses. In the grand scheme of things, Manzikert was a turning point that reshaped the balance of power. It marked the beginning of the end for Byzantine dominance in Anatolia, setting the stage for future conflicts and shifts in control. The Seljuks didn't just gain territory, they gained a foothold that would enable them to exert influence far beyond their borders. This wasn't just about land. It was about rewriting the rules of power in a world where the stakes were as high as the mountains surrounding the battlefield. What's more, the battle and its aftermath highlighted the fragility of empires that rest on the laurels of past glories. The Byzantines, once the envy of the medieval world, found themselves grappling with internal strife and external threats, a cautionary tale of how even the mightiest can fall. Meanwhile, Alp Arslan and his Seljuks demonstrated that adaptability and cunning could outmaneuver brute strength and outdated strategies. As the dust settled over Manzikert, the Seljuks stood poised to capitalize on their newfound dominance, with Anatolia serving as both a prize and a stepping stone to greater ambitions. Alp Arslan's legacy wasn't just one of conquest, it was one of transformation, where the Seljuk Empire transitioned from a regional powerhouse to a formidable player on the global stage. The ripples of Manzikert would be felt for generations, shaping the course of history as new powers rose and old ones crumbled. So, as the story of the Seljuks unfolds, remember that behind the epic battles and grand victories lies a complex web of strategy, ambition, and human frailty. The expansion under Alp Arslan wasn't just about adding lines to a map. It was about redefining the landscape of power in a world where only the boldest survived. And while the Seljuks might not have had the flashiest armor or the most polished propaganda, they had something far more enduring: the ability to turn opportunity into empire, one decisive battle at a time. In the next chapter of this unfolding saga, we'll dive deeper into the aftermath of Manzikert, exploring how the Seljuks consolidated their gains and navigated the turbulent waters of medieval politics. Stay tuned, because if you thought the battle was dramatic, the political maneuvering that followed is a story you won't want to miss. With Anatolia now firmly in their grip, the Seljuks had a brand new problem: running a multi-ethnic empire that stretched its fingers all the way from the Hindu Kush to the Mediterranean. You know, just your everyday logistical nightmare. While Alp Arslan was out there winning battles and expanding borders, it was up to the Seljuk administration to keep everything ticking like a medieval Swiss watch, minus the cuckoo clock, of course. First off, let's debunk the myth that the Seljuks were just a bunch of nomads who got lucky. These guys were no strangers to the complexities of empire building. They knew that if you want to keep an empire running, you need more than just swords and horses. You need brains. Enter Persianate culture, a sophisticated blend of Persian administration and Turkish military prowess, which was like combining the best of both worlds, or a medieval version of peanut butter and chocolate. The Seljuks were smart enough to adopt the Persian bureaucratic system, which had been honed over centuries. Picture this: a vast network of scribes, tax collectors, and administrators, all working tirelessly to keep the empire's gears greased and turning. They borrowed heavily from the Persian model of governance, which was all about structure and efficiency. The vizier, or prime minister, emerged as a key figure in this system. Think of him as the empire's CEO, orchestrating policy decisions and ensuring that no one was skimming too much off the top. One of the most famous viziers was Nizam al-Mulk, whose Book of Government wasn't just a manual but a masterpiece of political thought. It was like Sun Tzu's Art of War, but for bureaucrats. Now, let's talk economics. The Seljuks understood that trade was the lifeblood of any empire. They controlled the Silk Road, the medieval highway of commerce that brought everything from silk and spices to ideas and culture across continents. This wasn't just about having a finger in the pie. It was about owning the whole bakery. They set up caravanserais, which were basically medieval rest stops, every 25 to 30 miles along trade routes. These weren't just places to grab a quick bite and stretch your legs. They were fortified inns where merchants could safely rest and exchange goods. It's like the ancient version of a highway motel, but with fewer neon signs and more camels. And let's not forget the infrastructure projects. The Seljuks were big on building roads, bridges, and irrigation systems. Water management was a huge deal, especially in arid regions where every drop counted. They constructed qanats, underground aqueducts that channeled water from mountains to the plains, ensuring a steady supply for agriculture. This was the kind of engineering genius that made Roman aqueducts look like kiddie pools. But all this progress didn't come cheap. The empire needed money, and lots of it. Taxes were the name of the game, and the Seljuks mastered the art of squeezing revenue from their diverse subjects without causing too much rebellion. They implemented a tiered tax system that took into account a person's wealth, occupation, and land ownership, probably the closest thing to a medieval IRS audit. Sure, no one likes taxes, but the Seljuks knew that a well-oiled tax machine was the secret sauce to maintaining power. The Seljuks also had to navigate the tricky waters of religious diversity. Their empire was a melting pot of faiths, including Sunni and Shia Muslims, Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians. Instead of imposing a one-size-fits-all religious policy, they took a more pragmatic approach. They were Sunni Muslims, but they didn't force conversion on their subjects. Instead, they used religion as a tool of statecraft, promoting Sunni Islam while allowing for a degree of religious tolerance. It was a balancing act worthy of a tightrope walker with a penchant for diplomacy. Now, let's not romanticize this too much. The Seljuk Empire wasn't an idyllic utopia of harmony and progress. There were plenty of power struggles, betrayals, and backstabbings, sort of like a medieval soap opera, but with more chainmail and fewer commercial breaks. The empire's structure was a patchwork of fiefdoms, where local governors, or emirs, wielded significant power. These emirs were the medieval equivalent of regional managers, and let's just say not all of them were thrilled about taking orders from the top. Despite these challenges, the Seljuks managed to hold their empire together through a combination of strategic marriages, alliances, and a hefty dose of political savvy. They knew that the key to longevity wasn't just about conquering territories, but about integrating them into a cohesive whole. This wasn't just about drawing new lines on a map. It was about creating a shared identity that transcended tribal loyalties. But even as the Seljuks cemented their rule, the seeds of future challenges were being sown. The empire's rapid expansion meant that the central authority was stretched thin, and the cracks in the foundation began to show. The sultans, who once wielded absolute power, found themselves increasingly reliant on local leaders to maintain order. It was a classic case of too big, too fast, where the sheer size of the empire became both its greatest asset and its most significant liability. So, while the Seljuk Empire was a marvel of medieval statecraft, it was also a reminder of the complexities of ruling a diverse and sprawling realm. They may have blended Persian finesse with Turkish grit, but the reality was far from a fairy tale. The Seljuks were architects of an empire that was as much a tapestry of cultures as it was a battleground of ambitions. As we continue to unravel the story of the Seljuks, we'll explore how they navigated the turbulent waters of medieval politics and warfare, setting the stage for the next chapter in their saga. Stay tuned, because the ride is only getting started. As we continue to unravel the story of the Seljuks, we find ourselves at a crossroads, a classic case of too many cooks in the kitchen. You see, the Seljuk Empire, in all its sprawling glory, was about as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. Thanks to the rapid expansion and the ever-popular pastime of dynastic dispute, internal conflicts were brewing like a medieval soap opera, minus the melodramatic music. Let's talk about rival factions, those delightful little groups that pop up when power is up for grabs. After Alp Arslan's untimely demise in 1072, courtesy of a particularly unlucky altercation with a captured prisoner, his son, Malik Shah, took the reins. Now, Malik Shah was no slouch. Under his rule from 1072 to 1092, the Seljuk Empire hit its peak. Picture this, a realm stretching from the Aegean Sea to the borders of China, a veritable smorgasbord of cultures and riches. But the thing about empires is, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Malik Shah's death in 1092 kicked off a succession crisis that makes modern political squabbles look like a kindergarten spat. The empire was split between his sons and other relatives, each one convinced they were the rightful heir to the throne. The result? A fractured empire with rival sultans squabbling over who got to wear the fanciest hat. The Seljuks had gone from a well-oiled machine to a dysfunctional family reunion faster than you can say power struggle. Now, while the Seljuk family was busy airing their dirty laundry in public, the First Crusade was gearing up like a medieval blockbuster. You see, over in Europe, Pope Urban Roman II had called for a holy war in 1095, rallying knights and peasants alike to take up arms and reclaim the Holy Land. The timing couldn't have been worse for the Seljuks. Already weakened by internal divisions, they now faced an external threat of biblical proportions. By 1099, the Crusaders had captured key cities, including Jerusalem, despite the Seljuks' best efforts to hold them off. This wasn't just a military defeat, it was a seismic shift in the balance of power. The Seljuks, once the undisputed heavyweights of the region, suddenly found themselves on the ropes, grappling with an influx of European knights who had traded their plows for swords. Economically, the Crusades were a double-edged sword. On one hand, they disrupted trade routes and drained resources. On the other, they sparked a cultural and economic exchange that would shape the medieval world. The Crusaders may have been a thorn in the Seljuk side, but they also brought new ideas and technologies that would leave a lasting impact on the region. Think of it as a particularly aggressive form of cultural exchange, with a side of religious fervor. But let's not get too romantic about the Crusades. The reality was brutal and bloody, with cities besieged and populations decimated. The Crusaders weren't just there for a sightseeing tour of the Holy Land. They were intent on conquest, and they weren't too picky about who got caught in the crossfire. For the Seljuks, this was a harsh wake-up call, a reminder that even the mightiest empires could crumble under the weight of their own ambitions. As if the internal squabbles and external invasions weren't enough, the Seljuks also had to contend with the rise of the Nizari Ismailis, better known as the Assassins. This shadowy group, led by the enigmatic Hassanai Saba, made a name for themselves by, well, assassinating key political figures. They operated from their mountain fortress of Alamat, striking fear into the hearts of rulers across the region. The Assassins were the medieval equivalent of a guerrilla marketing campaign, except their product was chaos. The Seljuks found themselves caught in a perfect storm of internal and external pressures, their once mighty empire teetering on the brink of collapse. The cracks in their foundation were becoming all too apparent, a testament to the fact that even the most formidable empires are only as strong as their weakest link. Let's not forget the economic realities of running an empire as vast as the Seljuks. Maintaining a standing army, keeping trade routes open, and managing a diverse population wasn't cheap. The empire's coffers were under constant strain, a situation made worse by the ongoing conflicts. And while the Seljuks had mastered the art of taxation, there's only so much blood you can squeeze from a stone before it starts to crumble. In the face of these challenges, Seljuks attempted to patch up their fractured realm. They negotiated with rival factions, brokered alliances, and tried to rein in their wayward emirs. But the reality was that the empire was simply too large and too diverse to be easily managed. The once unified Seljuk Empire was slowly unraveling, a patchwork quilt of territories held together by little more than threads of ambition. As the Seljuks struggled to hold their empire together, they faced the harsh truth that power, once lost, is not easily regained. The very qualities that had propelled them to greatness, their adaptability, their cunning, their willingness to seize opportunity, were now being tested like never before. The Seljuk Empire was a house built on sand, and the tide was rising. So, as our tale unfolds, remember that the story of the Seljuks is not just about battles won or lost. It's about the complex dance of power and politics, the ebb and flow of empires, and the harsh realities of human ambition. The Seljuks may have been architects of one of history's greatest empires, but they were also a cautionary tale of how quickly fortunes can change. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the Seljuk saga, exploring how they navigated the stormy seas of medieval politics and warfare. The ride is far from over, and the stakes are only getting higher. So, as we draw the curtains on the Seljuk saga, let's take one last look back at what made these guys more than just history's footnotes. Sure, they were masters of the medieval power play, but their legacy stretches far beyond the battlefield. Imagine a world where art and architecture spoke louder than swords, a world the Seljuks helped carve into existence. Spoiler alert, it's not all about the glory of conquest. Sometimes, the real story is in the tapestry left behind. First, let's talk architecture. The Seljuks were no slouches when it came to building. Their mosques, madrasas, and caravanserais weren't just structures, they were statements. Think of the Great Mosque of Isfahan, a colossal blend of Persian and Islamic design that could make even the most jaded traveler stop and stare. Built around the late 11th century, this mosque was everything a medieval power wanted to scream: sophistication, might, and a dash of divine endorsement. With its soaring iwans, those monumental arched gateways, and intricate tilework, it was a literal high point in Seljuk architecture, punctuating the skyline like an exclamation mark. This wasn't just architectural vanity, it was strategic. These buildings served as cultural touchstones, reinforcing the Seljuks' legitimacy in the eyes of their subjects. They were like medieval billboards, broadcasting power and piety to anyone who passed by. The Seljuks knew that if you want to leave a lasting impression, you build something that will outlive you. It's the kind of thinking that says, I was here, long after you're gone. But let's not just marvel at the stone and mortar. The Seljuks were cultural magpies, borrowing and adapting ideas from across their empire. They were the ultimate remix artists, blending Persian, Byzantine, and Central Asian influences into something uniquely Seljuk. Their contribution to art includes those famous glazed tiles and intricate stucco work that would make a modern-day Instagrammer swoon. It wasn't just about looking pretty, it was about innovation. The use of geometric patterns and calligraphy in their art wasn't just decorative. It was a form of visual storytelling that transcended language barriers. And speaking of languages, let's not skip over the Seljuks' role in reviving Persian as a literary language. In a time when Arabic dominated the Islamic world, the Seljuks championed Persian poetry and literature, giving us luminaries like Omar Khayyam. His quatrains, or rubaiyat, explored themes of existential reflection and the passage of time, timeless musings that resonate even today. The Seljuks' patronage of Persian culture was like a cultural renaissance, setting the stage for future dynasties like the Safavids and the Ottomans to pick up the baton. Economics, too, played a crucial role in the Seljuk legacy. They were the custodians of the Silk Road, keeping those trade routes humming with activity. Merchants from China to the Mediterranean were drawn to the bustling markets of Seljuk cities, where you could find everything from spices and silks to gossip and ideas. The Seljuks didn't just trade goods, they traded culture. This cultural exchange was a two-way street, making the Seljuk Empire a melting pot of innovation and tradition. But let's not sugarcoat it. The Seljuk legacy isn't all sunshine and roses. The empire's later years were marred by fragmentation and decline, a stark reminder that even the greatest empires are fleeting. The once mighty Seljuk Empire eventually splintered into smaller states, each vying for power and survival. Their story became a cautionary tale about overreach and the perils of maintaining a vast, diverse empire with more internal dramas than a soap opera marathon. Yet, despite their eventual fall, the Seljuks cast long shadows over the centuries that followed. Their architectural style influenced the Ottoman Empire, whose mosques and palaces would echo Seljuk designs. Their promotion of Persian culture laid the groundwork for a cultural identity that would endure long after their political power waned. Even their administrative innovations, like the use of viziers, would be adopted and adapted by succeeding empires. So, what's the takeaway from the Seljuk story? It's a reminder that history is as much about what you build as it is about what you conquer. Empires rise and fall, but culture and architecture can endure, shaping the world long after the last battle is fought. The Seljuks, with all their complexities and contradictions, remind us that legacy isn't just about power. It's about the stories you leave behind. As you drift off to sleep with these new nuggets of knowledge, remember that history isn't just a list of dates and dead guys. It's a living, breathing tapestry of human ambition, creativity, and folly. The Seljuk Empire, in all its glory and its chaos, was a masterclass in empire building, a bittersweet symphony of triumphs and trials. And while the sands of time have long since swept over their empire, their echoes linger on, whispering tales of a bygone era when art and architecture sang louder than swords.